What? What is this?
So slow to catch on.
Look at those monsters!
Relax, beautiful.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Typewriter Sessions. As always, I'm Brett, and before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to start with a quick update and a bit of an announcement. First off, both Claire and I want to sincerely apologise for the delay in getting this episode out to you. Our plan was to launch part 1 of our Resident Evil 2 series on September the 29th, the exact date the events of Resident Evil 2 take place. But, as sometimes happens, life got in the way. Between family commitments, work, and the challenge of aligning our free time, things took a little longer than we hoped. Then, to make matters worse, both Claire and I were hit with COVID back to back, which really threw a wrench into our plans. If you saw the video I posted on YouTube, or on my YouTube channel, when I was in the thick of it, I was doing some recording, and as the video progresses, I'm just going down and downhill, and you'll see that it just completely wiped me out. I had no energy, I lost my voice, and it's safe to say recording was off the table for a while. But thankfully, we've both made a full recovery. Unfortunately, I do have some bittersweet news to share. Claire will be taking a step back from recording for a while to focus on some personal matters that need her attention. Now, we're obviously aware that the podcast has only just started, but this podcast was born out of a shared passion, something Claire and I have both carried since we were kids, and we've been friends a very long time, and it's been amazing to finally bring that to life together. So it's definitely tough to see her step away, but of course, her well-being comes first, and we're sending her all our love and support, and a first aid spray and some herbs, and we hope that those help. But with that being said, the show must go on, and we are dedicated to bringing you the most comprehensive coverage of the Resident Evil franchise. And stepping out of the ruins of Raccoon City to join me at the mic is someone I'm really excited to introduce. Please welcome James, who will be joining me for the foreseeable future here on the Typewriter Sessions. Say hello, James.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Brett.
So, like Claire, James is a long-time Resident Evil fan who's been following the series since the beginning, and I can't wait for you all to hear his insights and perspectives. So, while we send our best wishes to Claire and hope she'll be able to return to the show when the time is right, let's jump straight into it. So, this is the Typewriter Sessions Resident Evil 2. And so, here we go. So, in our last couple of episodes, we covered the genesis of the gaming franchise Resident Evil. From somewhat small and unassuming beginnings, we discussed everything from conception, development, story, the game's release, and everything in between, and of course, all that followed after. But today we're moving on to an entry in the series many deem to be the ultimate Resident Evil experience, and introduces characters and plot points which would remain with the series for decades. What's your perspective on that, James? Do you believe that Resident Evil 2 is the ultimate Resident Evil game?
I think I can see why it's perceived that way from maybe from like the outside looking in. I think I remember back at the time, I was sort of in my sort of early teens when the first Resident Evil launched, and I was aware of it, but it was still this sort of like new kind of niche thing that was sort of picking up heat. But by the time Resident Evil 2 came out, the world like exploded. Do you know what I mean? And I think that legacy of 2's release never really went away in the public perception. I think that you just look at the reaction when Capcom announced the Resident Evil 2 remake.
Oh yeah.
The fact that, obviously they did already remake, the first game many years before that, but the fact that that's where they decided to jump in this sort of modern generation of gaming, it tells you that even Capcom acknowledged that like 2 is sort of the big boy.
It kind of reminds me of the decision, which they had to have been influenced by this, but it's kind of like Konami deciding to remake Silent Hill 2 and not the first.
Yeah.
Because everyone thinks of Silent Hill 2 when they think of Silent Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the Snake Eater, like going straight to that Metal Gear remake rather than even the first one. Yeah,
I know, that's it. I mean, I know that they did remake that on the GameCube with the twin snakes. That was fucking incredible as well. And I can't believe I owned that and I sold it. What an absolute fucking loser. So I loved that, but you kind of think to yourself, Metal Gear Solid, should they have remade the Shadow Moses one? I think they should have. But a lot of people still feel really strongly about Metal Gear Solid 3, don't they?
Yeah, I feel like we won't turn this into like the Metal Gear podcast, but
Metal Gear Sessions.
Yeah, I do feel in that scenario that I think people have more nostalgia for Metal Gear Solid 1, but I think again the sort of broad consensus is that 3 is the best of the franchise, and I think because again Konami had a lot of goodwill to claw back after the last sort of decade or so, and I think that's why they've gone for Silent Hill 2. It's why they've gone for Metal Gear 3, because they're like the sort of undisputed big hitters in their respective franchises, and maybe the best ones to like reintroduce a new generation of gamers. And I think 100% true with Resident Evil 2 as well. That's
clearly what they were thinking, wasn't it? It's like, oh, well, if we're going to reintroduce these classics, then we'll start with 2. And I think it's because the stakes are bigger, because you've got the city and everything just feels like you can do so much more with the city. And I think if you're going to start somewhere and you want to really blow people away with what you're capable of, you go for the bigger setting, you go for the bigger stakes. And I think giving the remake treatment to Resident Evil 1 again might have just been a little bit underwhelming for some people, where with 2 would have just, it's just like you said, it introduces another new generation of players, doesn't it? But it's still, you can totally understand why they would choose it, because, well, it's just what some people would deem to be the quintessential Resident Evil.
Yeah, I think most, I'm sure there are plenty of people that have their favourites that aren't one of the first 2 games, but I would imagine, sort of gun to head, most Resi fans, if you ask them, it would either be the first or second game that are their favourite. But I think if you asked most people what one obviously it is iconic in so many ways, but I think that there's that the sort of the police department setting, it just sort of, I think it just sort of popped into pop culture a little bit more. Yeah,
exactly.
Than even the Spencer Mansion did.
Yeah, I think the RPD is sort of like the natural upgrade to the Spencer Mansion, isn't it? So yeah, it is sort of like that natural upgrade, I think, and it's just even bigger than the mansion. You feel, even though when you're inside, you get this feeling like there's more going on around you, outside and everything.
Yeah,
so,
I also think the sort of nature of the game, the way they sort of, the first game had this sort of option to play as either Chris or Jill, and it gave you little variances between, which you chose. But I think Resident Evil 2, it actually gave you like a full sort of 2-part story. So again, just like this widened scope, not just in the setting, but in like the way the game actually played out.
Yeah,
just a much sort of bigger experience.
Yeah, which of course we're going to cover all of that. Yeah, but I think that's it, isn't it? It's like it really felt like the stakes were bigger, and it felt more than ever that the choices you were making would have reverberating consequences. So yeah, but we are of course going to be covering in this episode 1996's Resident Evil direct follow-up, Resident Evil 2, developed once again by Japanese video game developer Capcom. Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998 for the Sony PlayStation, and as I'm sure it will come as no surprise, Resident Evil 2 was a huge hit and so solidified the game's position as a growing franchise for Capcom and for fans around the world who were eagerly awaiting its arrival. As covered in our previous episode, Capcom had not anticipated for the first Resident Evil to be as much of a success as it was, both critically and financially. But as soon as it was, development immediately began on a sequel, and despite the original Resident Evil being released in Japan in 1996, that's March 1996, a release date for the sequel was set as March 1997. So they were already aiming to have another one out on market a year later.
That's ambitious.
Such was game development back then, though. I mean, they could turn these games around pretty quick when they wanted to, and as we're going to come to very, very soon, they probably would have succeeded if it didn't have the murky development that it did. So, without further ado, let's just get into it. Let's talk about Capcom's first of many sequels in the Resident Evil franchise, Resident Evil 2. So, it's 1996, and after the release and unprecedented sales of Resident Evil, Capcom moved quick to capitalise on the game's success. At the time of Resident Evil's release, Capcom was struggling financially, and the success of Resident Evil, certainly due to its excellent international sales, essentially saved the company. So with Capcom wanting to move forward with a sequel, they turned to Kenichi Iwao, one of the main writers of the original Resident Evil, for guidance on where the story should go. In the run-up to the original Resident Evil's release, Kenichi Iwao had written two possible scenarios for a sequel should one go ahead. One saw the game take place in the ruins of the mansion and Umbrella being shut down following the mansion incident. Umbrella would have been replaced as the series' antagonist by the US military, who were looking to sweep up and claim the remains of Umbrella's biological weapons with the aid of the returning Albert Wesker, who would have been revealed to be a US military operative. His return did have problems, however, due to Wesker's apparent death at the hands of the Tyrant towards the end of the first game. But, interesting note, when playing the previous, if you investigate Wesker's body after he is attacked by the Tyrant, it would claim that Wesker was dead. But it was originally intended that he would be unconscious, which would have helped to explain his survival should they wish to bring the Wesker character back. So this was, however, lost in translation, with the subtitles going on to say he was dead. So when it was translated, they were just like, okay, yeah, Wesker's dead. But he wasn't supposed to be dead. So by the time it obviously reached all of the markets and everything, everyone just assumed that the character of Wesker was dead. And it was mainly believed that that was the case, all down to the translation from Japanese to the different languages, mainly English. But because of that confusion and the subtitles reading something different against that which was intended, Capcom had to stick with Wesker being dead and find another way to bring him back in the future. Personally, him being unconscious and surviving after being gored by the Tyrant seems a little bit of a stretch to me. Yeah. I just kind of think it's probably turned out for the best that he did end up being dead, because anyone who can survive being speared, he's unconscious. Really? Not for long.
Just a bit of a concussion from that giant monster attacking me with his huge claw.
Just give me CPR and I'll be all right.
A couple of aspirin will be fine. Not
yeah.
Tylenol though.
Oh no! No, I don't want to be autistic. So I'm not entirely sure how it'd be that, or entirely likely he could have survived such a thing, but it just kind of made sense that he should be dead, really. Even on a game that is as far-fetched as it is, when you think about it, it's still a little bit too far, I think.
And that also just makes his eventual return even more dramatic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and I think it also helped them to really, really, really think about how they wanted to bring him back as this ultimate villain in the Resident Evil series. The goal of Umbrella was always to create ultimate bio weapons, and then they had one all along with Wesker, and he does become that, and I think it's kind of like this full circle moment for the series, I think. So ultimately, I think it worked in their favour. Yeah,
they've sort of accidentally given themselves enough breathing room and enough time to actually figure out a really cool way of dealing with his character, rather than just sort of ham-fistedly saying, "I was asleep.
Yeah. I just nodded off for a bit and woke up and everyone was gone.
The mansion's all blown up. What happened?"
And somehow I managed to survive that and all. Yeah, brilliant. So, anyway, the other synopsis written as a potential sequel idea was a full-scale outbreak of the T-virus in Raccoon City. And naturally, when a sequel was greenlit, it was decided very, very quickly that the T-virus outbreak in Raccoon City would be the desired story to progress with. The idea of the urban setting being widely agreed upon by those on the production team as the best scenario to tell a story. The idea of revisiting the mansion was left on the table as a subplot, and it was intended that having players revisit the mansion would have given a more direct connection to the previous game, but this idea, however, was quickly scrapped. A team consisting of an estimated 40 to 50 people, which would go on to be collectively known as Capcom Production Studio 4, but personally I preferred Team Horror, but whatever, which was made up of the team from the original Resident Evil and the other half of the team being made up of newer Capcom development employees. The team got to work with Hideki Kamiya, serving as Resident Evil 2's director, and the previous game's director, Shinji Mikami, stepping into the role as producer for Resident Evil 2. So, at this stage of development, director Hideki Kamiya was also tasked with writing the story and the script for the game. Now, this was something he had no real experience in. And when I say no real experience, he didn't have any experience at all, to be quite honest. So, although it was collectively decided that the outbreak of the virus in Raccoon City would be the story of the game, all Kamiya had to work with was this general synopsis written by Iwao. But Hideki Kamiya had been part of the development team on the previous Resident Evil as a planner, and stepping up into the role of director was huge. But this would go on to both be a blessing and a curse for Kamiya. Kamiya began working on the story and the script under the watchful eye of Shinji Mikami, who frequently butted heads with Kamiya over the game's direction. Mikami tried to influence the team with his vision, but eventually took a step back in terms of his involvement and had only requested to be updated by way of demonstration of the game in its current state once a month. Mikami seemed pleased with the game's development in individual parts, but he did not feel that as a whole it was satisfactory. He remained hopeful, however, that the game would come together as one complete package in the final 3 months of production. The decision by Mikami to take a step back would prove to be, without trying to sound dramatic, catastrophic in terms of Resident Evil 2's development, and would also play a part in a chain of events which would have profound personal effects on Kamiya. Yeah. So, to understand the troubled development of Resident Evil 2, and to try and put into the best and most coherent order possible, which, by the way, this was a monumental task to try and do, because to try and write this script as if you have no knowledge of Resident Evil 2 and to write Resident Evil 1.5 when you have to reference Resident Evil 2 in the first place was so fucking hard. Honest to God, right? I was at times tearing my hair out. I was just like, how can I explain what is going on here without referencing Resident Evil 2 when technically Resident Evil 2 in this timeline has not been made yet? It was so hard. Like, honestly, it was a monumental task. So anyway, so to try and put it in the best, most coherent order possible, we must first understand who the game's director, Hideki Kamiya, is, and how, at the age of 23, he had taken on a task which, at this stage of his career, he was not prepared for. Hideki Kamiya joined Capcom in 1994, and after graduating college, he had applied for jobs with a number of game developers, including Sega, who sadly turned him down, and Namco, who had interest in him joining their ranks, but as an artist rather than a games designer, to which Kamiya declined. After being accepted by Capcom, he was immediately assigned to the development team working on Resident Evil, and he stayed on this team all the way through to its completion. It is unclear why or how he was chosen to be the director of the game's sequel, but one thing was clear, and we will cover this in detail soon: But, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, Hideki Kamiya at this stage of his career did not have the leadership skills or confidence to take charge of a project of this magnitude. A lot of this pressure came from the high expectations set by the success of the first game, and Capcom and the players were naturally expecting something bigger and better, and to exceed their gaming experience from the previous game. Regardless of the enormity of the task at hand, Kamiya got to work on building a story using the template drawn up by Kenichi Oao, with Raccoon City succumbing to a full-scale outbreak of the T-virus. Kamiya had begun working with you'll have to forgive me if I get this wrong, Isao Oishi, to build upon and flesh out some of the concepts of the characters Kamiya had created. Firstly, we had Leon Kennedy, or if we are going to be specific, Leon S. Kennedy, who originally had a different name. And this is just, well, imagine how different the Resident Evil franchise would have been if instead of Leon Kennedy, you'd have taken control of a character by the name of Grant Bittman.
Grant.
Yeah. So he was almost named Grant Bittman, but this was changed to Leon Scott Kennedy, or Leon S. Kennedy. Grant Bittman. How could they have thought that was a great idea? So Leon, at this stage of development, was much the same as he appears in the finished product, with his RPD uniform and his character profile largely remaining the same as when we see him in the full release of the game, so being a rookie cop. But one big notable difference, which I'm sure most people will be grateful for, was his hair, because early concepts had him with much shorter hair.
Oh, no.
We
can't be living in a world without Leon's beautiful curtains.
No, that's it. I mean, I guess they were still kind of curtainish, but they were much shorter, and they were still a bit gingery, which he is quite ginger in.
Bit of a 90s boy band haircut.
Yeah, afraid so. So, so early concepts had him with this sort of like shorter hair, and initial concepts also originally had him wearing casual clothing, but this was changed to the RPD uniform we all know and love. In terms of Leon's story, although he was a rookie cop, the game originally did not mark the events of the game as his first day on the job. He was already at the RPD station at the time of the outbreak, and he was defending it from the undead trying to get in. So Leon had a set of supporting characters which would progress through the story with him, one of which was Marvin Branner, who, if that name sounds familiar, was the cop you encounter at the RPD station in the full game, the original Resident Evil 2, who sadly had been mortally wounded by a zombie, and gives you a key card so you can progress through the game in the actual released version of the game. Marvin, in this early version of the game, however, would have been a main partner for Leon, even making it as far as the end of the game, but we'll touch on that shortly. Another character Leon would interact with was a lady called Linda. Linda was an Umbrella researcher who was attempting to retrieve a sample of the G virus, and if that sounds familiar, of course, she was repurposed into Ada, who was a mercenary and spy with the same intentions, and that was to retrieve the G virus. And soon would be the addition of the game's protagonist, the game's other protagonist. But I'm not talking about Claire Redfield. We are talking about Elza Walker.
Indeed.
Yeah, there we go. So Elza Walker was basically a beta version of Claire. She was a motorcyclist, loving college graduate who rode home into Raccoon City after being away on vacation, with the intent on enrolling at Raccoon City University. Her appearance did differ from Claire's in that she wore a motorcyclist bodysuit, which was white and orange. Her hair was also blonde and slightly shorter than Claire's, but it was still in a ponytail similar to Claire's. Elza's story would have had her ride and crash into the Raccoon City Police Department to seek refuge and safe haven after seeing the state of Raccoon City and the chaos caused by the outbreak. Elza would have crashed her bike into the main entrance and managed to barricade herself in within the police station, where she would come across her own set of supporting characters trying to find their way out of the city. But it should be pointed out at this stage how Kamiya had intended for Leon and Elsa's stories to be told independently of one another. So, unlike Leon and Claire's story system, in which one playthrough of a character can affect the other playthrough of the other character, but how they ultimately do sort of intertwine around one another. Leon and Elsa would have had no crossover at all, and would have been two independent stories playing out. So Elsa had a sidekick in a character named John, who she would have found in a prison cell and she would have freed. Elsa also came across a character called Roy, who was Leon's superior officer, and from what I can tell was basically a clone of Leon. He looked identical. So his appearance looks so similar to Leon in some of the footage I've watched when Elsa is interacting with Roy. I actually thought it was Leon. I actually thought, well, hang on a minute, I thought they didn't cross over, but it's because this dude is actually a guy called Roy. So, really, really strange. So, Roy died as a result of a zombie attack, and he does actually come back as a zombie, and this character was obviously cut from the full actual release of the game.
Are you sure?
Well,
is it maybe an Easter egg? He might be the Leon clone zombie in the opening cutscene in the back of the car.
Yeah,
that could be Roy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, which will if people don't know what we're talking about, I will be talking about it later on. I think it might be in the next episode, actually, if I remember rightly about the script. But there's a zombie who appears in the back of the car in the opening cutscene of the game, and when you look at this zombie, it looks exactly like Leon. So that must be Roy.
Yeah,
it's the only answer. It's the only answer.
What's also funny is if you stuck a baseball cap and some sunglasses on him, it'd also look like Roy from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Put a sock in it, Roy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I never really thought that either, actually. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good point. The final character Elsa interacted with was Sherry Birkin, who, of the various support characters, remained largely unchanged in relation to the finished version of the game. I should point out that Leon and Elsa's partner characters, Marvin and John respectively, would actually follow the player around at times. So, although this is a feature that did appear in Resident Evil 2, with Sherry following Claire around and Ada following Leon around, Marvin and John would have followed the player around more regularly and persistently, moving through areas to progress the story more often. So they were actually with you quite often, So it was almost like a little bit like Resident Evil 0, I suppose, where you can always choose to have a partner following you around. It was kind of like that. You generally always had someone with you, from what I can tell. There were obviously many times where you were on your own, but there was this idea that you was always going to have like a buddy with you. So,
okay.
Bit of a strange choice, but this made the support characters more than just the usual dialogue piece to interact with. During Elsa's playthrough, players would still take control of Sherry at points in the game, just as you do in the released version of the game. So, remaining support characters who actually appeared in both Leon and Elsa's versions of the game were Chief Brian Irons, who was massively different from the villainous and sadistic character we got in the final version of the game. Chief Irons in this version was professional, cared about his officers, and was also helpful to the player, which is of course a million miles away from the murdering freak we ended up with. I guess Chief Irons in Resident Evil 2 is just more realistic to some police chiefs in real life.
Well, who are you suggesting that people in positions of authority are corruptible and... Because that doesn't sound realistic, surely.
No. No. It doesn't. I don't know even why I said that. No, it doesn't sound realistic at all. Moving on. Other characters were both Annette and William Birkin, who were still both Umbrella researchers and parents to Sherry. William was still eyed to be the main antagonist, although it would seem he would have remained more human and would not have transformed in the way he does in the final version of the game. Interesting to note, though, that concept art did show Annette Birkin to be infected with the G virus, and she would also undergo some level of transformation. But it is somewhat unknown whether or not this was going to end up in development at this stage, because all it seems is like she was drawn up in concept art. There's no like character model, so it seemed like that was the intention originally when they were doing concept, but there was no created 3D model.
It never made it
into
to digital.
Yes,
it stayed on paper.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't even make it into the game at this stage. So whether that's just because it never got that far or whatever, I don't know. But I just don't think we'll ever really know for certain on that one. But director Hideki Kamiya had turned to the sequels such as Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Aliens as inspiration to his sequel for Resident Evil. Kamiya was a huge fan of these action-oriented sequels and hoped to apply the same genre-switching technique to Resident Evil 2, removing some of the horror elements for a more action-based approach. But slightly off topic, as a fan of Resident Evil, I do just want to say that removing horror and replacing it with action never works in regards to Resident Evil, I don't think.
No.
And if it does, it's by treading a very fine line between horror and action. Resident Evil 4 does it perfectly. Resident Evil 5, not so much, but it kind of redeems itself in the fact it's a co-op game and it's fun to play. And of course, it rounds off the story with Wesker being the main villain and his turn as antagonist of the series brings the whole thing full circle by him being back all the way from the first game. But Resident Evil 6 is just utterly terrible. It's just a terrible, terrible game. I mean, it don't even feel like a Resident Evil game. And even if... Well, put it this way, right? If you removed the fact that... If you renamed all the characters, removed Resident Evil 6 from its title, and people were judging it on this game that had just dropped out of nowhere and just been released as this thing, there's no way it would have got the reviews it did.
No.
I mean, I don't think it got overly amazing reviews, but I think it was probably still more favourable than what it actually deserved.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's sort of that brand loyalty has carried it through.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so as well. There's, I think because people have... It was a good-looking game for its time, I think.
It was that sort of tail end of the sort of 360 PS3 generation where developers had actually sort of, just before those consoles died, they'd figured out how to get like the absolute best out of them.
Really push the console to its limits and make games look fantastic. And they'd tweaked that Resident Evil 5 movement thing where you could move and shoot at the same time, but it just got out of control though. I mean, there was some time, like, I played it not that long ago with Charlotte, actually. She played Resident Evil 5 and she really enjoyed it and she wanted more. So we did 6 and I was like, we'll play 6 because it's just it's a relatively fun co-op game. But I was like, trust me, you'll get bored of it though because it goes on forever.
Yeah.
You've got like 4 campaigns essentially with Ada's.
And they're all... None of them are like insubstantial, are they? They're all like quite...
They're long, which
lengthy.
Normally I am not the first person to complain at a long game because I like getting my teeth sunk into something and being able to get my money's worth out of a game. But fuck me, that game, man, just don't stop. It's all well and good that a game lasts for fucking ever if it's good, but it's not good. That's the problem.
Yeah, you feel like you're being held hostage after a while.
Yeah. I always say if a game feels like it's playing me rather than the other way around, I'm fucking done. I'm not playing it anymore. But we played through it and Charlotte was just like, what the fuck am I even playing? Like, this is just not that fucking good at all, is it? She was getting so frustrated with it and I think she just persevered because she just wanted to get to the end and say she'd done it. But she was just like, this is just fucking stupid. Yeah. It's not a good game. Anyway, that's another conversation for another time. In order to capture the action essence of these kinds of sequels while still trying to instill a level of horror, Kamiya hoped to increase the number of zombies on screen at any one time. In order to achieve this, one of the techniques was to reduce the number of polygons per zombie model, and then that would allow them to have more zombies on the screen at any one time to give the player a sense of fear of being overwhelmed, and in such invoke the horror element in this way. But This did mean that the zombies were now less detailed and they lacked any real interesting features which differentiated themselves from one another. So I've seen some videos of it and they all just look the same and they don't even look good. You know, they just look like these sort of blue blocks with, you know, they kind of look like people.
Vaguely human-shaped
yeah,
blobs. Yeah,
yeah, it just doesn't look good. But I do get the idea that sort of like being overrun by zombies in an urban setting does make sense, given that the population would have been infected and it would have turned, you know, all of these people turn into zombies. You would expect to come across a large number of zombies in a city, so there would be a lot. And I do get what he's like trying to do there. It's like this idea of like, well, we're in the city, there's going to be a lot of fucking zombies because everyone's been turned into zombies. So I get the mentality of it, but and I do think it could be scary, but sacrificing horror for action is what his real intention was, and I just don't think it was a great move. I don't think Resident Evil 3 Nemesis managed to achieve it, but that being said, Resident Evil 3 is definitely more of an action affair, and it didn't really do much for me in the way of horror either, but it was fun to play nevertheless. But I think that was one of those games that tread a fine line between horror and action, and it was probably the game that got under my skin the least.
Yeah.
Because it's just not scary, is it? You know, there's not really that horror element to it. It's definitely run around, guns blazing, explosions. And,
it's more panicky than scary.
Yeah.
I think.
When I played it for my YouTube channel, I loved replaying it because it was probably one of the Resident Evil titles I've played the least. And it was great replaying it, but I was able to tell the difference of that horror vibe playing it when I'd been playing the others. So, yeah. So with even just these development differences mentioned, before we proceed with any more of the intended development for Resident Evil 2, I think we should just discuss how and why this game varied so differently from the release version, and why did development change course so drastically. Well, as previously mentioned, Shinji Mikami had tried to influence the team with his input, but after being at odds with Kamiya on numerous occasions, had decided to trust Kamiya's direction and took a step back in order to allow production to continue. And as also previously mentioned, Mikami had requested a demonstration of the work and its progress just once a month. So Mikami taking the step back proved to have dire consequences in relation to the game's development, and Mikami's hopes of the game coming together cohesively in the final months of production was very optimistic. As the game's completion drew closer, it was clear that Resident Evil 2 was not shaping into the game Mikami and Capcom had wanted, and great concerns for the project meant the decision was made in February 1997, 1 month before its intended release. The release date would be pushed back to August 1997 to allow more time for production. Now, not to sound harsh, but many of the problems stemmed from Kamiya's inexperience at leading a project at this level. This was Kamiya's directorial debut, and it is due to this inexperience, Kamiya lacked the leadership skills to direct the team in a singular vision and direction. Kamiya sadly did what a lot of people do when they are new to managerial roles. Instead of leading his team and giving them instructions and direction, he allowed his team to pursue individual elements they liked or found to be fun, believing if they all did what they liked, it would be a game made up of so many great ideas. And they would all just come together well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This, of course, led to an abundance of issues with a game lacking any real substance, depth, and instead created a game which was inconsistent, incoherent, with the essence of the original Resident Evil. Overall dissatisfaction for the project meant Mikami had to enlist additional aid to help Kamiya with some of the story elements, believing the story to be one of the core problems of the game in its current state. Resident Evil 2 supervisor Yoshiki Okamoto was very keen to turn the game into a franchise, and he was also unhappy with the game's direction and its story. Okamoto was also unhappy with Shinji Mikami, who, although unhappy with Kamiya's story, wanted to tell a story which essentially brought the story of Resident Evil to an end with Resident Evil 2, believing future sequels to be pointless. So Can you even imagine Resident Evil only being made of 2 games?
That was it.
Like that. I mean, this is the thing. Everyone always looks at Shinji Mikami like he was just this absolute master, but what he did with Resident Evil 1 was great. Yeah. But he didn't do it alone. Like we covered in the last episodes. Like those, Kenichi Iwao came on to write the story and everything, saved that project. I mean, like fucking Mikami wanted to tell the story of fucking cyborgs and shit. It's like, it was all because of Iwao who came in and put that on target.
Yeah.
And then in this one, Mikami's just like, yeah, let's just make this one and I've done. He's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, that's enough now.
What? Like, it's the franchise is going to be like 30 years old next year. Can you imagine if we just never had another game since Resident Evil 2? The original Resident Evil, fucking bonkers. So, you see, Okamoto saw the potential for a whole universe to be birthed from this game, with numerous stories to be told, and the potential for the story to be further built upon was being missed. At this point, Okamoto had recently been introduced to Noboru Sugimura, a professional screenwriter, and Okamoto asked Sugimura if he would be interested in taking a look at the story of Resident Evil 2 in its current state and give some hints and tips on where it could be improved. Sugimura was happy to do so after being a fan of the original Resident Evil story, and he was intrigued to see what he could do to further the story along. Sugimura was originally brought on as a consultant, doing his best to rework some of the story elements Kamiya had written. Now, we will of course discuss the changes made in due time, but it was at this point Hideki Kamiya had started to suffer from some mental health issues, some of which were triggered by external factors, but others were an unfortunate side effect of Kamiya's lack of experience in a directorial role and the ongoing production issues caused by this. During production, Hideki Kamiya had also unfortunately suffered a break-in at his home, which had a huge effect on Kamiya, leaving him unable to sleep through fear of the persons responsible returning. This in turn had a further detrimental impact on his ability to do his job, something he was already facing difficulties with. With Sugimura on board consulting with tweaks to the story, Mikami slowed production on his next title, Dino Crisis, pretty much to the point it was shelved, by bringing many of his team on board to help with Resident Evil 2. This factored with both Okamoto and Mikami making the decision to push back the release date of Resident Evil 2 to allow more time for development, and the break-in at his home, leaving him with next to no sleep. Kamiya was exhausted, and his confidence was at an all-time low. As expected, I think for a man in Kamiya's position, it is totally understandable to see how these setbacks in production, alongside his personal issues, would only compound his declining mental health. Things only continued to get worse for Kamiya when Sugimura was asked to do a complete rewrite of the story. Okamoto was so unhappy with the changes being made by Sugimura, he decided to completely rewrite the story, and it would be the most efficient solution to the problem. I would like to point that I have conflicting arguments to this, as I have some sources citing it was Sugimura who had insisted that due to the number of rewrites required, and how rewriting one element had a domino effect on many other elements, the simplest and best solution was to scrap the story and start entirely from scratch. So, I've got these like two versions that it was Okamoto who said, just start again. I've got one version where it's Sugimura saying, well, this is just impossible, I might as well just start again. I don't know which one's true. I'm finding more fact to say that it was Okamoto that pulled the plug and told him to start again. But yeah, it's hard when you're researching this and you're getting these different things. You don't know which one's true and which one's not. So it was quite difficult. But either way, I'm not sure which one I entirely believe. I maybe feel maybe that way more than the other. But I always say it takes you take two sides of a story and the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So I think there was probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B to this story, really. Either way, this of course meant a complete shutdown on what has now come to be known as Resident Evil 1.5, and production restarted with a new story and a new direction. So with this, Kamiya unfortunately fell into a depression. He turned to alcohol, and Kamiya has gone on record to say that the turn to alcohol was not only to help him sleep after his home was broken into, but to deal with the struggles of directing the project and the fear of being blacklisted in the gaming industry after the ongoing production problems with the delays caused by the shutdown and restart of Resident Evil 2. And to be fair, Kamiya had reason to be concerned. Supervisor Okamoto had indeed had discussions with Mikami about removing Kamiya from the project and replacing him with somebody else to direct. Mikami, however, had managed to convince Okamoto to keep Kamiya in the position, and the additional support they had brought in would essentially right the ship. Now, it's still not clear why Mikami defended Kamiya like this, but as I said previous, my theory is Mikami saw something in him and he just needed a chance to shine.
Yeah.
Maybe Mikami saw his potential when Kamiya worked on the original Resident Evil as a planner. I don't know, but either way, Mikami really did help to stop Kamiya's worst fears and nightmares coming true. That being said, it did nothing to stop Kamiya's mental health from spiralling out of control, and his turn to alcohol was beginning to have a detrimental effect on his mental health and his physical health. We have part of an interview here from with Kamiya with Biohazard France, where he discussed this subject. Now, this has been translated from Japanese into French and then French into English. So there is some holes, and I've done my best to fill in the gaps to make it flow a little better and to understand. So although this is going to be an excerpt from that interview, I have just put some words here and there to make it a little more legible. So when asked about his personal difficulties during production, this was Hideki Kamiya's response. Quote, "When I got into bed, I started to worry. How should I manage those plans? How will I direct this cutscene? And I started having mini meetings inside my head. In Resident Evil 2 development, we had meetings twice a week with all 40 team members. In the meetings, everybody said, 'How's the schedule going?' Or things like, 'I'm ready to make this room, but the map's not done yet.' To me, and then when I tried to sleep, those kinds of questions and complaints came back, and I started to think, I have to do this, but I couldn't sleep. So I drank strong alcohol straight, and then I went to sleep. And when I did that, I could sleep till morning. I did it every day." So this guy, bless him, was really going through it. And sadly, Kamiya did this so regularly, his health declined to this point, which I'm going to read it, but he was actually throwing up blood.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So in the same interview, he said, quote, "One day I went to a restaurant with my friend and I ate too much. I then felt like I was going to throw up. I ran to the restroom and threw up, and I saw that it was just full of blood." So this just shows how much all of this had become a problem for Kamiya, and how the pressure of the project was affecting him. Clearly, he was passionate about the project, and he cared about it, and the industry he saw himself having a future in. Other people would have just walked away or not given a flying fuck, but Kamiya cared not just about the future of the project, but for his future in the industry, which he absolutely loved. Now, with Resident Evil 1.5 shut down and production restarting, Kamiya was able to complete the task of bringing Resident Evil 2 to our shelves with the help of Mikami, Okamoto and Sugimura. But before we discuss that, we simply have to cover some of the things which never made it to Resident Evil 2 and have stayed within the confines of Resident Evil 1.5. Many parts of 1.5 were either added or repurposed, but a great many things were scrapped entirely and never made the jump into the final version of the game at all. Now, the topic of Resident Evil 1.5 could really be its own episode, to be quite honest, but because it really can be that extensive. But as per the format of Typewriter Sessions, we will always cover things which were cut from the entry, and we'll usually cover those a little bit later. But because of the complexities of the subject and the fact Resident Evil 1.5 is technically its own game, we're just going to cover those things now And these are just the things that didn't survive, not the things that carried over and were repurposed. This is just simply things that never made it. So, firstly, something I felt was really cool was 1.5 had dynamic music, meaning the music would change depending on what was happening in the game in that moment.
That's quite an advanced thing for
its time.
For a PS1 game, definitely.
Yeah, and I think Kamiya was pretty good at that. When I go through some of the things that he sort of came up with, it's surprising how many of the things that he came up with actually ended up being used for future titles.
Yeah.
And he clearly had a vision. That's what I feel sorry for this guy for, is that like he's clearly very, very, very talented and definitely ahead of his time in some ways. Like you just said there with the dynamic music, it's quite advanced for a...
Yeah, I suppose it's one of the things about being a game developer, isn't it? It's sort of whatever generation of machines you're working in, or whether it was the 90s on the PS1 or now, you're still limited by the technology available to you, and I think we probably take for granted a lot of things that games do now, but back then, I mean, and at the time, what the PlayStation was doing seemed incredibly advanced and was mind blowing.
Yeah.
But there are so many sort of roadblocks that they must have, ideas that people threw out there that were just impossible to fit on a CD.
Yeah. Well, we even spoke about some of those things just in the first 2 episodes of Typewriter Sessions covering Resident Evil 1996, because there were so many things that they wanted to do, but at the time they didn't know how to make the PlayStation reach those limits, and to push it that far. And some of those things ended up being used for future games instead, because they were like, well, we've had this idea, but we just don't know how to do it, and those things ended up being pushed back.
Yeah, and then the technology finally catches up with the ambition, and
that's it. And then in the end, they get to this point where it's like they've got all these development tools, and they're like, well, we know what we can do these cheeky little tricks, which will make that we can do that now, and that, which is really cool. But it's just a shame that some of these people, like Kamiya, had these ideas that just they just couldn't do yet. Just again always thinking too far ahead. It was pretty cool though. So, yeah, so we had dynamic music, so that would change if the action intensified, if there was a room full of zombies, and then, if you cleared it, it would go back to being more ambient and steady. Another idea was to have different clothing to give you a boost to your overall defense, a bit like the hip pouch in the released version of Resident Evil 2. The clothing would allow the player and, the character to carry more items, but these different clothing items were in the form of an RPD Kevlar vest and an Umbrella Corporation body armor. Yes, and they were equipable and you could actually see them. So they actually changed your appearance. They weren't just something you put on and it gave you a boost to your stats. Yeah, they were actually visible things. And also the clothing would deteriorate over time as you took damage. So that was pretty cool. And your character would also have visible wounds as well. So I think that's quite cool. Again, it's a little bit further in advance for its time, I guess. It's not something I ever remember in a future Resident Evil game either. Like, I don't remember your clothing deteriorating unless it was actually part of the game. Like a story element.
Yeah. It's sort of encroaching into like RPG mechanics, stuff like that, isn't it? This idea of like stat boosts based on like what you're wearing, armor you have equipped, or
yeah, exactly. So I mean, ultimately this would be removed for limping and slower walking animations as you sort of sustained more damage, but I think and that became a staple of Resident Evil 2, didn't it? The Resident Evil franchise after that. But yeah, originally it was going to be like this visible thing. We've also discussed the characters and the side characters of the game, but what about enemies which were cut? So there's some interesting ones. Zombie gorillas.
Oh,
yeah. So what the fuck? I mean, I kind of get the idea of zombie monkeys or whatever, because you kind of animal testing, and the whole idea of testing on apes and stuff. But why are they in Raccoon City?
Yeah. It's. I can picture. I mean, the opening scene of 28 Days Later. You can very easily picture a room full of like rabid zombie monkeys. But I think,
but then I think
I know umbrella scientists are maybe persistently biting off more than they can chew, but be like, what will happen if we inject this already incredibly dangerous giant primate with this notoriously pretty enraging virus?
Yeah, I mean, they do seem to enjoy doing that, don't they? It's like, right, let's find the meanest thing on the planet and fucking inject it with something that's going to make it meaner.
Yeah.
Like a snake. Like, what's the worst that can happen? But I think the bit that I didn't really get, I mean, because I seem to think that zombie or infected gorillas appeared in Resident Evil 0, I think. I might be wrong. But I think what made it strange for me is when I've watched footage and I was doing my research for this, is that the apes, the gorillas, they are found in the RPD car park and they come out of the back of some police vans. So why are they there in the first place?
It was just some horrible hazing gone wrong for Leon's first day.
Yeah.
One of the other officers like, I've had a great idea. This'll be really funny.
Yeah.
Wait till the newbie comes in, gets out of his car. I'll open the back of the van.
And we'll
bam,
release
gorillas.
the gorilla. Yeah. It's nonsense. It just don't make any sense. It's just like, can you imagine they're upstairs? It's fucking hell. Do you know what we've forgotten about? What? That gorilla's downstairs in the van. It'll be infected now, won't it? Shit! Don't go in the garage. Fuck. Oh yeah. I didn't really understand that one. So another quite infamous one actually is the man spider. So as the name implies, this is a cross between a human and a spider. So it's a bipedal creature with multiple arms, pincers, and the colours seem to be similar to the spiders in Resident Evil. So a bit of a weird one. As expected, these were both cut from the game. Everything else which was actually developed beyond the concept stage made the jump from 1.5 to the release version of the game, albeit some further development here and there. But I guess I should just point out here that all the zombie dogs, of course, made it into the final version of the game. They did originally intend to use a different breed in 1.5. So from the usual Doberman that is quite persistent through Resident Evil, they were going to be German Shepherds. Which would have been pretty cool. We always see Doberman in it.
You do.
Gives Dobermans a bad name.
It does. Poor Dobermans.
Mm-hmm. So there were also some different types of zombies which were cut. These include fat zombies, although they did make the jump to Resident Evil 3. But more on that in a future episode. Black zombies and more varieties of female zombies. So really representing
nice bit of inclusion, yeah.
Yeah, we're all about diversity these days, and clearly they were ahead of the time back then. Shame we're wasn't much ahead of the time.
Yeah, the world is regressing at an alarming rate. But
it is.
At least Capcom are they're still following
equality.
They're still following the DEI rules when it comes to the undead.
Yes, exactly. So some of the zombies behaved differently too. So this time they could climb up and down on ledges, and if they were crawling, they could also stand back up.
Oh.
So if they'd been knocked over, they could get back up, which was pretty cool.
Oh, the Chumbawamba zombies. Zombawombies.
I like that. Yeah, that's what we're calling them in the future. Brilliant. I like that. So
I'm glad you invited me now.
I am. Because I wouldn't have been able to think that fast. That was good. I like that.
Oh, you get one.
Yeah, that's it.
My brain's shutting off.
That's you one. That's you one. So one thing that this game was really different at is that it had quite a few weapons which were unique and exclusive to this version. And when it was like, Hideki Kamiya, if it was his idea anyway, must have been like, we need guns, you know, like that bit in The Matrix. It's just the fucking walls of fucking guns appear. It's a bit like that. So right, this version had quite a few weapons which were unique and exclusive. These came in the shape of grenades, which were actually thrown across environments. So this wasn't a grenade launcher; these were actually thrown grenades, and I think for its time that's pretty cool because I'm not really thrown grenades didn't really make it into a Resident Evil game until like Resident Evil 4, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't remember anyway. I think there was Molotov cocktails in Zero for burning the leech monsters. But I don't remember grenades. Anyway, so there was that. That they were exclusive to Leon. Another weapon cut from the game was Elza's starting handgun, which was a Beretta M93R. This unique and rather strange-looking gun was cut from production when it was lost when it was restarted because Claire's starting handgun became a Browning HP. But as a nod to Elza Walker, the Beretta M93R would be Claire's main pistol in Resident Evil Code Veronica. So, a little fun fact for you there. Another option for a melee weapon became a metal pipe, which I'm sorry, but boshing zombies with a metal pipe sounds like a ridiculous amount of fun. And interesting to know that Birkin ended up having a metal pipe during his first transformation.
Yes,
so I don't know if that's some sort of nod. The shotgun was also different from the release version, being modelled after the Italian Spaz 12 shotgun, so it looked more modern and tactical. There'd be 2 Magnum options, which were different from the Magnum in the release version of the game. The first being a Ruger Super Red Hawk, which is a similar style Magnum to the Colt Python with a wooden handle and a 6-round barrel, apart from it differed in appearance by having a longer barrel. And speaking of the Colt Python, this was actually the other Magnum in the game from this version of the game, which was cut. So 2 Magnums does seem ridiculous, and to be fair, the sheer amount of guns in this game is also ridiculous. But one thing about this particular Colt Python, which also makes it just awesome, is that it was Barry's. Barry's Colt Python.
The Burtonator.
Yeah, so this would have been an unlockable weapon and would have been the second most powerful gun in the game behind the rocket launcher. So no info exists on what criteria would have been you would have to have met to unlock it. But yeah, it was just, I don't know if it was something you found or whatever, but yeah, it was.
Yeah, you couldn't assume it would have been relatively late game.
Yeah, I think so. You either found it or you unlocked it by doing something, but yeah, I'd imagine if you found it, it's probably going to be one of the last guns you find, surely to God. Finally, the H&K MC51 assault rifle. This took 7.62 rounds and was cut from the game entirely, and only very early builds of this weapon had been implemented into 1.5, but of course production stopped. So this is what was cut, and as you can see, it was a lot, which is why and how it's been dubbed 1.5, because essentially it is its own game. Development shut down at an estimated 60 to 80% completion mark, although this number does fluctuate depending on where you get your information. And the release date changed from August 1997 to January 1998. Although I have to admit I could not find anything to indicate when this decision was made and when this was publicly announced. So I don't know at what point they turned around and said, okay, we're not going to make August 1997 now, we're going to push it to January. I don't know when that happened. I really tried to find when that was announced, but I just couldn't find it. Over the years, it has become clear that although we knew Mikami's, Okamoto's, Sugimura's, and even Kamiya's dissatisfaction at the game's state, but we have also come to learn many of the production team were also unhappy. Many of the team had voiced concerns at the lack of connection between the first and second game, citing Zombies and Umbrella as very little to help bring the 2 titles together and capitalise on the excitement of the first. Many of the development team also felt the low quality of the character models of zombies and monsters also did little to make the game feel scary or exciting. A lot of people felt the environments were uninteresting and boring, and this really didn't help when people had just played a game where they were fighting zombies and creatures in a dark, creepy mansion and an underground lab. So, I mean, to be honest, I think this quote from Shinji Mikami in an interview with Famitsu back in 1998 summed up what a great many people felt about the project. Quote, "No one element was specifically boring, just everything as a whole." Ouch. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? You've poured your heart and soul into this, and that's the general feeling of pretty much everybody.
This is absolutely less than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like everyone's done a lot of hard work, but all of this is actually just pretty terrible.
Oh, man.
That's brutal, isn't it? So although Hideki Kamiya had done what he thought was best and allowed people to work on individual parts with what they wanted and what they liked, he pretty much missed the brief when it came to what people wanted from a Resident Evil. I think he felt he was doing the right thing, and bless him if he just worked closer with Shinji Mikami from the get-go instead of butting heads with him in terms of its direction. He would have most likely have saved himself a lot of personal torture. Although we're going to jump the timeline a little here, but whilst we're on the topic of Hideki Kamiya, when Resident Evil 2 was completed, he was completely exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Following the game's release and success, Kamiya was brought on board the production team for Resident Evil 3, but his experience during Resident Evil 2 had left him lacking in any confidence in his ability, and due to his aforementioned exhaustion, he opted to join the team as a planner instead. But at this point, I'd like to shine a ray of happiness and hope over Hideki Kamiya, because after spending the better part of this episode basically saying how inept this guy was, as most things tend to have a silver lining, Resident Evil 2 turned out to have one for Kamiya as well. Despite Noboru Sugimura's involvement and how, in a way, his involvement caused a shutdown and restart of production on account of his writing contribution, Kamiya did actually come to build a relationship with Sugimura, who became a writing mentor for him.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So with Sugimura's mentorship, Kamiya found his confidence again and went on to have some great success as both a writer and director in the video games industry, with games such as Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe 1, 2 and 3, Okami, Bayonetta 1 and 3, among many others. So at least this did have a happy ending for Kamiya, and I, for one, certainly hope he's happy and he's enjoying doing whatever he's doing.
Well, he's making a new Okami game.
He is indeed, yes, which is very excited about.
So excited about.
Yeah.
Okami was. I had a bit of a lull in my gaming in the sort of mid to late noughties. I didn't play games for quite a few years, and Okami was the game that sort of pulled me out of the funk and put me back in. It was the Wii version.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, someone bought me a Wii for Christmas, and
that game felt like it was made for the Wii.
Yeah, it was a game that I was sort of aware of, and I'd seen the PS2 version kicking about. But yeah, the idea of it's a game where you wield a paintbrush as a weapon. It just felt completely suited to the Wii, and oh man, love that game so much. Yeah. Still, one day I'll play it again. I've got the HD remaster sat on a shelf at home.
Get it down, you mate.
Yeah.
Get it down, you. Surely that's a game your son could watch. I mean, he's young.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not
well, I mean, there's your little imp mate Isun that follows you around the game. He makes a lot of quite lewd and pervy jokes about all the women in the game.
True.
But
it's not voice acting.
It's all text based. So yeah. At the moment, I don't think a toddler will. Nah. he's smart, but he's not smart enough to read all the boob jokes.
And if he does, fair play to him.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's fine if you've got to learn to read somehow.
Exactly, and at least he's reading good stuff.
Yeah.
So, with production restarting, nearly everything had to be reconsidered, from content to tone. Everything was examined and either repurposed or cut, depending on how those particular elements fit into Sugimura's new story. During this transitional period, many of the production team were sent to work on Resident Evil Director's Cut, which was deemed as somewhat of an apology to people for the delay in production and to give people a taste of more Resident Evil while they wait. As previously covered, Resident Evil 2's, or should we say Resident Evil 1.5, original story was extremely thin and did very little to advance anything within the world of Resident Evil. At this stage, the game centred around the story of a small handful of survivors within Raccoon City, all of which had no connection to the previous entry. Sure, it had Mr. and Mrs. Birkin and their daughter to tell some kind of a story of the virus, but it did not have the level of storytelling regarding these characters or the world that Sugimura would go on to build and introduce us to after the mansion incident. So with that, I feel the first thing we must cover in terms of the production and development of what would eventually become the game we recognise today should be the story of Resident Evil 2 and why it is deemed by many to be the best Resident Evil game in the franchise. So, Sugimura's rewrite of the story used the same Outbreak in Raccoon City premise, written by Kenichi Iwao, but instead of Umbrella being shut down in the wake of the mansion incident, Sugimura took the story in a different direction. The survivors of the mansion incident, Chris, Jill, Barry, Rebecca and Brad, would try to convince everybody of what had happened at the mansion and Umbrella's involvement in the events, but they were not taken seriously, and through the course of the game, it would unravel that corrupt police chief Brian Adams? Ah, nice! Everything he did it for you. So, police chief Brian Irons, never going to let that down, helps to bury Umbrella's true sinister workings and the incident at the mansion. In Sugimura's story, Umbrella continued to thrive and the remaining members of STARS are effectively driven out of Raccoon City. The game's main story focuses on telling this story from characters Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield's perspective as they both arrive in Raccoon City and find themselves in the midst of a full-blown outbreak of the T-virus in Raccoon City, turning the inhabitants into zombies. Leon arrives into Raccoon City ready to begin his first day on the job when he stops his car to find a dead body in the road. As he inspects the body, he finds himself circled by zombies, backing him into a nearby alley. Here he encounters Claire Redfield, who has just arrived into Raccoon City on a motorbike. Stopping into a nearby diner, she finds it deserted until a zombie appears and comes at her to attack. Fleeing out the rear entrance of the diner, this is where she runs into Leon. Finding an abandoned police car, they make it to the police station. But while in the car together, Leon gives Claire a handgun out of the glove box, and Claire explains she came to the city looking for her brother Chris. This, of course, being Chris Redfield of the previous Resident Evil game. Now, suddenly, the pair are attacked by a zombie hiding in the backseat of the car, and in the struggle, the car crashes. The same zombie.
It's Roy.
It's Roy. Roy's in the backseat. So, an earlier cutscene before Leon and Claire's intros, we see a truck driver at a gas station being bitten in some kind of confrontation. As Leon and Claire recover from their crash, they notice the out-of-control fuel truck with a zombie at the wheel, the same truck driver we just saw earlier. As the lorry splashes into the car and explodes into a huge fireball, the pair are separated, and such begins Claire and Leon's story. So, the reason I had to explain all of that is because it's important that the pair are separated, and this is why you get two different versions of the game. So, this obviously varies from the previous game because the two stories, although taking place in the same areas, that the players progress through, and they're all nearly exactly the same. Leon and Claire have their own support characters and stories being told. Claire, for example, comes across a little girl called Sherry Birkin, who is pursued by a monster. In Claire's attempt to help the girl, she comes across Police Chief Brian Irons, or Brian Adams, depending on which version you're playing. Through progression of the game and the reading of files, the player comes to learn that Irons is actually a sadistic murderer and has a history, which if you read the files within the game, let's just say he's not a very nice man. So, Irons is in fact a pawn of Umbrella's, and he's on their payroll, helping them to cover up the mansion incident, discredit the remaining STARS members, and to continue to turn a blind eye to Umbrella's shady work within Raccoon City. Claire learns from Leon, who finds Chris's diary, that he is in pursuit of Umbrella and has left Raccoon City for Europe. Agreeing they no longer have reason to stay within Raccoon City, they decide to separate again to find a way out and stay in touch via a radio. Claire eventually catches up to Sherry in the sewer system, But he's separated once again and she's sucked into a drain. Sherry lies unconscious and she's infected by a monster which has been pursuing her. Claire, meanwhile, runs into someone else in the sewer, a woman who is an umbrella scientist, Annette. She's looking for both her husband and her daughter being Sherry, the girl the player has been trying to help. Annette's husband she's looking for is in fact the monster, which has been hunting the girl, Sherry's father, William Birkin. She reveals to Claire that William Birkin is a top researcher and scientist for Umbrella, and he's developed a new strain of the tyrant virus, the G virus. Now, did you know that the G in G virus actually stands for Golgotha?
I did not. No.
Well, Golgotha derives from the Aramaic word for skull, and it is also the name of the site where Jesus Christ was crucified.
Well, there you go.
So, Annette accuses Claire of being a spy, sent to steal William Birkin's research, and explains that William had injected himself with his virus, not only in a desperate attempt to save his own life, but in order to prevent it from falling into Umbrella's hands. The player learns that Birkin had been mortally wounded when Umbrella had dispatched USS agents, meaning Umbrella Security Service agents, to recover the G-virus sample and any other research. Birkin, when confronted, draws a gun on the USS agents, refusing to hand over his life's work. The agents open fire on Birkin and retrieve the T and G-virus samples. The G-virus has the ability to regrow tissue on a cellular level, so Birkin presumed this would save his life. But, however, as to be expected with any Resident Evil game, Birkin undergoes a monstrous transformation. And throughout the rest of the game, Birkin continues to transform and mutate and confronts the player and character at these different stages of his transformation. And with Birkin transforming, he pursued the escaping USS agents and kills them all, destroying numerous samples in the process. The cracked vials and leaked T-virus samples are then eaten by rats and also swept away by water, which carries the virus across Raccoon City, polluting the water supply, and the virus being carried into people's homes and workplaces, resulting in the outbreak of zombies. So, Annette believes William must be pursuing Sherry to infect her with an embryo of the G-virus. As his only blood relative, it is the only way he can pass the G-virus on to further reproduce and multiply. Eventually, Claire is reunited with an infected Sherry who is suffering from the sickness caused by the embryo implanted by her father. Together they reach Umbrella's massive underground laboratory known as... Well done! And Claire leaves Sherry to rest while she looks for a vaccine. While searching, Claire uncovers more of Umbrella's bioweapons and is able to manufacture a vaccine for Sherry. Claire and Leon manage to make contact with one another, and Claire instructs Leon to retrieve Sherry and head for an underground train, which will take them to safety after a self-destruct sequence has been activated, which will completely destroy the facility. Claire squares off against William one more time, who undergoes a further transformation, but manages to overcome this and escape to the train where Leon and Sherry are waiting for her. The game ends with seemingly riding to safety, all the while it would appear something else is on the train with them. The true conclusion to the game can only be seen by playing through Leon's version of the game after completing the playthrough with Claire first. So this is where something which is very unique to Resident Evil 2 sort of comes into play. So, after beating the game with Claire and saving your end progress, you would unlock Leon's alternate scenario, which tells the story from a different perspective. Now, we'll discuss how this all works shortly, but let's just continue with the story for now, as this will lead us into many more elements we need to cover and discuss. So, Leon's story is told from the other side of the crash site, right at the start of the game, and he also finds his way to the RPD station. He comes across Marvin Branner, seemingly one of the only remaining police officers still alive, and however, Marvin has been wounded because of a zombie bite, and his time is running out. After giving Leon pointers on what to do and where to go, Leon makes a move to reunite with Claire and to leave Raccoon City. As he progresses through the station, he finds Chris Redfield's diary in the STARS office, and he learns that he's left Umbrella to go to Europe, and ultimately he gives that diary to Claire, as we've just mentioned. They separate in search for a way out, and Leon is confronted by an Umbrella bioweapon, a tyrant dubbed Mr. X. This giant tyrant pursues Leon through the station, who eventually finds his way to the garage area. There he comes across Ada, who is looking for her boyfriend John, an Umbrella researcher. Fun fact, John is the name of a researcher from the previous Resident Evil game whose name and password were used to log into the Umbrella computer, and the password is his lover, Ada. Oh. Yeah, did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so...
Is that forward planning, or is that just they've sort of retroactively...
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it. I think they've created a character and they've thought, well, actually, I'll tell you what, we can link that back to that dude who left a diary in his password with his ever-loving Mrs. called Ada, and we'll call her Ada. I think that's what happened there. Definitely not planting Easter eggs. So together they head into the jail cells and they find Ben Bertolucci, a reporter who seems quite happy to be locked away in his cell, safe from the monsters and creatures roaming the station and in Raccoon City. Ben explains he has all of the data he needs on Umbrella to expose their true sinister workings. Leon and Ada continue to explore the area to find a way out, and during their search, Ada finds a chain and locket belonging to Sherry, which she holds onto, wearing it around her neck. Meanwhile, Ben is killed by a mutated William Birkin, and his journal is left behind for Leon to recover, explaining the extent of the cover-up for Umbrella's work. Leon and Ada eventually make it to the sewers, where they are opened fire upon by a mysterious assailant. Leon takes a bullet for Ada, who goes on to pursue the assailant while Leon lays unconscious. Ada catches up to the person, who turns out to be Annette Birkin. She explains who she is and tells the same story to Ada that she told to Claire during their playthrough. Annette knows Ada is in fact a spy and has been sent to recover the G-Virus for a competing organisation. Annette notices Ada wearing Sherry's locket, and the two get into a struggle which leads to Annette falling over a railing and into the sewers below. I'm pretty sure she actually just straight up slaps someone. I think she's like, bosh, and she just goes over, I think, if I remember rightly. Leon, meanwhile, regains consciousness and catches up to Ada. Ada treats his wound and the pair continue on. Reaching transportation, which will take them to Umbrella's underground facility, Leon is pursued by Mr. X once again. Narrowly avoiding confrontation, Leon and Ada ride the lift down. However, now a mutated William Birkin reappears, wounding Ada. Leon manages to fight the creature off, but is separated from Ada when the elevator leaves him behind as he looks for a way out. Finally reaching the lab, Leon manages to reunite with Ada, but this is short-lived as she is seemingly killed in a fight with the Mr. X tyrant, who damages the computer which controls the self-destruct sequence in the confrontation. As the computer triggers the sequence, Leon manages to push the tyrant into a pit of molten metal, whatever, but I just don't know why that's here. Why is there molten metal in this underground facility? I don't know why it's there, but it's there. Very Terminator 2 style. And anyway, he goes off the edge. The tyrant goes off the edge, and Leon recovers Sherry's pendant from the ground. And it's also revealed to house a sample of the G-Virus. Leon speaks with Claire, and they arrange to meet at a train/shuttle, which will take them to safety. Claire asks Leon to collect Sherry and informs him she has a vaccine for her. Leon recovers Sherry, works to restore the power to the train, but then comes across the tyrant he believed dead in the pit of molten metal. However, the tyrant has mutated further and is now deadlier than ever. Leon manages to fight the monster off, but is given a rocket launcher by a shadowy figure in the rafters, which is undoubtedly Ada, and the final blow is dealt. Leon returns to the train, and Claire makes it just in time as the self-destruct sequence is triggered, and this is where the true ending is revealed. As the trio are escaping and the vaccine is administered to Sherry, the train suddenly receives an additional passenger. Leon goes to investigate the rear carriage and finds William Birkin, who has mutated into a huge mass of tissue, determined to reach Sherry. Leon manages to deal enough damage to allow him to escape the carriage, disconnect it, and leave Birkin to be engulfed in a lot of flames caused by the self-destruct sequence, and that destroys him once and for all. The trio finally make their escape and walk off into the sunrise, discussing what's next. So this is what is described as the true events of Resident Evil. Now, I know I've covered the story in a lot of detail here, and in a lot more detail than we did with the original game, but I felt it was important to do this due to the production and the presentation of this game, because it will ultimately help in the explaining of some of the other elements we'll come to shortly. I also wanted to explain the story in this kind of detail because I think it also goes to show just how in-depth and elaborate the story was, and it really shows just how much Sugimura had done to help create an in-depth world for this game and for the franchise. It also helped to create a world which would allow future installments to easily be built upon.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you think about it, I mean, the original one is kind of bare bones in its way. I mean, it works perfectly for its setting, but like we were just talking about at the start of the episode, it's everything about Resident Evil 2 as, when it finally reached the version it reached, but the story only made it what it was, like, so in depth and so, like, far-reaching in terms of, like, how people were able to feel like they were part of something huge. Yeah,
it just blew up the world, didn't it? Like, the original game could very easily, I mean, if in an alternate timeline where that game had flopped, it could have just stood on its own and told a complete story, and it doesn't necessarily leave any dangling plot threads. But yeah, 2 sort of exponentially, like, as well as just bringing the virus out into the world instead of this, like, contained environment. Yeah, it sort of implicates this much bigger reaching, sort of grasp that Umbrella has on society across America and the world, even, not just.
And I think what you just said there is a really good point, because I think, like, I dare say there's probably a lot of people who never actually played the original, but have played 2. And that was probably their introduction into the series as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you're absolutely right in the fact that you could probably play or start your love for Resident Evil with 2 and never really be any the wiser for not playing Resident Evil 1. Like, I think, I'm not saying that in a bad way to Resident Evil 1, because I think Resident Evil 1 is just fucking incredible. I think it is so B-horror movie with its setting, and I think the mansion is iconic, and the idea of all of these horrors happening within a residential domestic setting is kind of what makes it even scarier in some ways.
It's a classic. It's a haunted house story, isn't it? It's
exactly.
It might have like a science fiction bent to it, but it is ultimately it's spooky things going on in a big creepy house in the woods.
Yeah, and I think that's it for me, is that, like, it really hits at that thing of, like, can you imagine finding this abandoned mansion and you go in and it's full of zombies? And I think you kind of feel like you can relate to that a little bit, where, like, the idea of a city being engulfed in an outbreak full of zombies feels like, well, that really is just strictly bound to the realms of sci-fi and horror, where even though it is still ridiculous to think that you'd find an abandoned mansion full of zombies, you still kind of
found one last week. Just wandering about Beverly Westwood. And
to be fair, around here I can believe that. But the idea, I think, because it preys more on the idea of when you find abandoned places, you're always wondering or scared of what might be lurking inside, and the whole idea of zombies being within there just pushes that boundary, but it still preys on those initial thoughts and feelings of what could be inside a weird place abandoned in the
Resident Evil 1's it's a mystery story, isn't it, as much as it is anything else. It's that sort of slowly figuring out what's happening, why is it happening, and you going into, I mean, it's hard to think about it now because it's so sort of ingrained into the, collective conscious, at least of, like, Resi fans. But, like, when playing that game for the first time, like, clean, it goes a lot of places that you couldn't expect, because it does present itself as a mystery first and foremost, whereas 2, it is just bam, zombies.
That's it.
There's no, like,
There's no build up to it. Is
Yeah,
there?
and there are like still elements to the story of like surprise turns and things like that, but it doesn't rely on mystery the same way that the first game does. It's much more of, it's like you said, it's aliens to the alien of the first game. It is.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? Alien is very much a horror. Well, Aliens is very much sci-fi action, isn't it? So yeah, you're absolutely right. So whilst we're covering the story and all of this is fresh in our heads, let's just move on to the characters of Resident Evil 2, and we'll quickly discuss the cast which made the transition from 1.5 to 2 and some of the changes. So before we discuss the sort of character bios, let's just take some time to discuss their overall presentation. So this time, characters were built with a higher polygon count, meaning models were much higher in detail. Claire and Leon especially were much more detailed with clearer faces, and their outfits being rich with, much more character. This goes without saying, all of the characters though, which also really added to their personalities, where in Resident Evil 1 they all looked different. They were all really wearing the same thing, just with a different colour palette, so like Barry with his red vest and then Chris with his green vest, they were wearing a uniform, wasn't they? So this time, however, you've got police uniforms, you've got lab coats, short, and you've got children's clothes, a variety of civilian clothing. It all really helped create this world of different characters, because you've got all these characters wearing such different things. You've got Brian Adams in his shirt and tie. Everyone was wearing something different, weren't they? And it just helps create that wider element of like there's this whole thing has affected so many different people.
Yeah. And all of the zombies are all how they worked contextually. The people in the streets were just civvies.
Civilian colour, yeah.
Once you get into the police station, the zombies are all cops. When you're in Nest, the zombies are all in lab coats. It sort of tells the story more visually as well.
Yeah, exactly. You really get a feeling of like that you are coming across infected based on the environment. Yeah,
it's not just generic zombies in the streets, generic zombies in the...
Yeah.
I nearly said sheets then. It's instinctive.
Damn! All right, freaky. I like it. So the development team had really managed to get to grips with creating detailed models and how to best make use of the PlayStation's hardware to create these amazing models and environments. But let's talk about the characters. So, of course, first of all, we've got Leon, who for the most part was largely untouched by the time he made it into the final version of the game. He was given his signature kitten-style hair, something Leon would become famous for. Leon is, of course, the rookie cop, first day on the job, and he arrives at Raccoon City to find it overrun by zombies, and he then races to find a way out with Claire and Sherry in tow. Claire, which of course brings us to the next character. So, as previously touched upon, Claire was repurposed from Elsa Walker, and Elsa was repurposed into Claire in order to create that link back to the previous game, because she was, of course, arriving into Raccoon City looking for her brother, Chris Redfield, who was one of the main protagonists of the previous game. Some of Elsa's characteristics did make the jump into Claire's character, such as the motorcycle, which Claire arrives on in the opening cutscenes. Claire was also a college student. She's just nothing to do with Raccoon City, though. In terms of appearance, the only thing that made Claire and Elsa similar was they both sported that ponytail, which we discussed. But her hair colour was changed to brown rather than Elsa's blonde hair. Claire's clothing was vastly different to the white and orange motorcycle suit, wearing red denim shorts with a matching red vest, which had now had the signature Redfield family crest on the back, which of course said made in heaven with the angel on the back and everything. As mentioned in our last episode, this was a reference to and a tribute to Queen's final album with Freddie Mercury as a member of the band before Mercury passed away. The name of the album, Made in Heaven, which was also a track on the album. This would not be the only Queen reference in this game, and we'll come to that later. So, Sherry remained unchanged in essence from her 1.5 version, with her being the daughter of William and Annette Birkin, but this is mostly where the similarities end. Sherry's purpose in 1.5 was to assist Elsa in unlocking doors and to navigate Raccoon City with her knowledge of the city. In 1.5, she wasn't infected by her mutant father, and the story of needing to acquire the vaccine was totally absent. Her appearance differed slightly as she had longer hair and she wore a cap, but she still kind of looked like a sailor. So, yeah. Ada was a rework of a character named Linda, who was a researcher / scientist for a rival organisation to Umbrella. She had a similar role as Sherry for Elsa in the 1.5 version of the game, in that she was designed to be a guide through Raccoon City for Leon. So Linda was also meant to help Leon reach the Umbrella factory to retrieve a vaccine for Marvin, who had become infected. But this was, of course, changed, and Linda became Ada. Ada underwent a change in appearance where Linda wore a scientist lab coat. She wore like a red top with a brown skirt, I believe, and some red shoes. But this was changed to like that sort of red dress type thing that she wore with the black leggings, or there were trousers. I don't really know what they were. And Ada was repurposed into that spy for the rival organisation, and of course she was sent to recover the G virus. Annette made the transition from 1.5 to 2 as well, with much of her appearance remaining the same. Annette, like many others, also received a more fleshed out story, whereas in 1.5 she was a researcher helping Elsa to find Sherry before William could reach her. Annette was now willing to protect her husband's life work at all costs and stop it from falling into the hands of Umbrella. So she'd sort of taken on more of a villainous role in this one. And Annette was originally designed to have been infected by William, as we discussed earlier, but that was completely scrapped. And Annette's fate in the finished and canonical version of Resident Evil 2 is sealed when she's killed by William in the underground lab. Chief Brian Irons, of all the characters to be repurposed from 1.5 to 2, Irons is probably the most interesting. So, sure, Elsa to Claire is interesting due to the change from one person to another, but Irons' character changes so drastically. But also the story on how these changes came to be is interesting. So, as previously mentioned, Irons in 1.5 was a character in both Leon and Elsa's playthrough, and was a helpful, loyal officer dedicated to the safety of his officers to the bitter end. But during this version of the story, he would have been bitten by a zombie and would spend a portion of the game resting laying down on a sofa. And as the game progressed, Irons would sacrifice himself to aid the escape of the player when the police station becomes overrun with zombies. Regarding his appearance, he wore a blue police officer's uniform, not too dissimilar to that of Leon, apart from the body armour, and he was also slightly younger from his Resident Evil 2 version. But if you're a Resident Evil fan, which, let's face it, that's probably why you're here, you already know that description of Chief Brian Irons is not what we saw in the finished version of Resident Evil 2. So, as we previously touched upon, Irons was reworked into a sadistic, murdering pawn of Umbrella. The extent of his nefarious character and background is revealed in a document found by the player. The document reveals to be a contact of Chris's, who has investigated Irons, and outlines his criminal and sadistic background as a suspected murderer and a rapist. And he's just so extreme. So these claims were unable to be substantiated due to his connections, which allow for the claims to never be formally investigated or pursued. And Irons manages to find his way to the top of the police department, and it becomes clear that the reason for this is because Umbrella were able to get him there, and in return all he had to do was just turn a blind eye to whatever they were doing, and the money would just continue to roll in. Irons was a character who only appears in Claire's story, and when Claire finds her way into his office, he's sat at the desk with the dead body of Catherine Warren, the daughter of the city mayor, Michael Warren, who's just laid across it, and you hear her scream before you enter. He explains that he had to kill her as she'd been bitten by a zombie and she was about to turn, and his killing of her was kind of like a mercy killing of sorts. That's what they all say, innit? Let's be honest. So Claire trusts his version of events for the time being and leaves to continue her search for Sherry, but when she returns she finds Irons is gone and the body of Catherine has also disappeared. Claire finds a hidden entrance within the office leading to a dungeon, which is just... and it's connected to the sewers. Investigating it, she finds Irons in the dungeon, whose mental state has just completely deteriorated. And he's also been attacked by William Birkin, and he's been infected by one of the Golgotha embryos. He goes on to reveal his involvement with Umbrella, that Birkin created the virus, etc. And just as he's confessing to all of this stuff, the embryo bursts from his chest and it tears him apart. And that marks the end of that disgraceful character. But I always think Irons is quite a crucial part in the whole corporate corruption of the city and how Umbrella managed to keep a hold of their control over it. So I always sort of think to myself, like, just it's always overlooked in a way just how important a role he had to play in the story. But I must go on to explain how this fast-changing character was actually the work of not just one person, but several. So Sugimura actually turned to the production team and asked them to brainstorm ways on how to make this character so sick and twisted. And this was designed to be some kind of team building and morale boosting exercise due to many of the production team feeling deflated and upset at the problematic production of Resident Evil 1.5 and its ultimate shutdown. But I just think that's really funny because, like, can you imagine? It's like, okay, guys, we're just going to sit down and I can see we're all really down in the dumps and I'm thinking of ways we can all just cheer ourselves up. Look, what I want you to do is I want you to picture a person and just think of ways that you can make him as disgusting as possible. You know, and everyone's there just like, yeah, well, have him a murderer. Oh, I've got one better, have him a rapist. And how about he eats human shit for breakfast? You know, it's just like...
He's the President of the United States of America in 2025.
Yeah. He's got friends who he says aren't friends, and they're all like really disgusting people as well. Epstein, you know. Like,
Oh, Irons is definitely on the Epstein list.
Oh, 100%. 100%. He's glad he fucking died by an embryo. Yeah, you know he's rubbing shoulders with fucking Prince Andrew. But
and other things.
And many other things. But yeah. But anyway, nothing brings people together like making a fucking monster, does it? You know, so lastly and very quickly, in relation to his physical appearance, this was also changed. He was made older and he wore a suit, and he was also made a little chubbier, and that's pretty much it. But many of his characteristics from 1.5 were carried over into the next character, and that character is Marvin Branner. So this was the police officer that Claire and Leon found in the police station. He's already wounded, as we've already explained. He goes on to explain the mansion incident and what happened and what's going on in the city, and that the STARS members were just not believed, and that, you know, Umbrella were behind everything. He locks himself away in one of the offices after giving the player a key card. I think it's a key card, or it's a key. I think maybe. I think it's a key.
Card. Is it?
Is it a key card?
Card sounds right, but who knows? I
can't remember that. I feel like it's a key, but I can't remember now, even though I played it not that fucking long ago. So either way, it gives a key item for you to progress through the station. But when you finally find him again later on, he's succumbed to the virus and he transforms into a zombie right before your eyes. Yeah. Something that's new as well for the game. So originally in the 1.5 version of the game, he was intended to be a partner to Leon, and he would have followed him through the majority of the game. Although he would have been infected, as previously mentioned, you would have worked with Linda to retrieve the vaccine to cure Marvin of the infection. Essentially, this storyline was tweaked and worked into Sherry Birkin, while Marvin Branner took on a smaller role just simply needed to advance the story at that stage. So Ben Bertolucci was a reporter locked away by Bryan Adams for attempting to reveal the corruption in the city of Umbrella. The player would have found him in the jail cells when playing as Leon, and he'd go on to explain that Umbrella controlled everything in the city, including the police, and Irons was a major player in Umbrella's cover-ups. He's ultimately killed by a mutated Birkin who is removing pretty much anybody looking to challenge him in Umbrella in Raccoon City. And his character was created from the splitting of a character from Elza Walker's scenario in 1.5, that being John, who was a civilian and a partner of Elza, and she would have found him in the jail cell just like you do Ben. And Ben's character is born from John's introduction, exactly, as I said, just exactly the same way. But the other part of that character, John, from Elza's playthrough, not just being, so he was split making Ben, but the other half was turned into Robert Kendo. So Kendo was the gun shop owner at the start of the game. Yeah, boy. And he was introduced as the first character you come across, who is a civilian caught in the middle of the outbreak. Sadly, his introduction is cut short because no sooner have we got to meet him and he's being all creepy with Claire, zombies break through the gun shop window and they attack and kill him. So, lastly, we have William Birkin. Now, you're probably wondering why I left old Billy Boy last on the cast of characters, because he technically falls into the category of monsters as well. So, during the early development, Birkin was still the antagonist of the game, but his story was nowhere near as detailed as what we got in Resident Evil 2. Birkin had no particular backstory and was more or less just an Umbrella scientist infected by the G virus. It was not elaborated on how he was infected in the original version of the game, and he only really served as the boss fight encounters for both Leon and Elza on a couple of occasions throughout each of their scenarios. Birkin's appearance in 1.5 was also different from that of his final released version. One notable difference in his first mutation was that of the missing eyeball, which grows on his shoulder. This became the sort of staple imagery for the game, really, and the eyeball was the start screen background image for Resident Evil 2. But it must be said, though, that this eye did appear on the start screen for Resident Evil 1.5, but it was seen that the eyeball had no reference to anything in particular in that game, and it was just simply a generic,
just a grotty eyeball,
just a minging eyeball. Yeah, just a weird eye. So another notable difference between Birkin in 1.5 and 2 was during his first appearance and mutation, Birkin would have actually called out Sherry's name. This never actually happens in the released version of Resident Evil 2. And I do think that's a shame because it sort of bridges that gap between man and monster for Birkin. They did implement this into the Resident Evil 2 remake, but obviously that's a story for another time. But yeah, I do think that they probably could have left that in. I think that would have been a nice...
Yeah, it seems like a weird detail to cut.
Yeah.
Because it's a line.
Yeah.
It's not a big thing to leave in if you're trying to like tighten a scene up or anything, and it does serve a narrative purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't stop. It doesn't prevent anything, does it?
No.
It's not like, oh, that's really holding us back. We might as well cut it. If you see the sort of footage, it's literally he just goes, Sherry, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was actually pretty cool.
Is it maybe at that point? Do we know that he's her dad? At that point in the game.
Well, I suppose it would depend, because I think if maybe you went into the game,
because that could be the only reason I could think if that they'd cut it.
Maybe
if they've decided they want to
too much exposition.
They want to just sort of like push the reveal that that he's William Birkin, that the monster is William Birkin, because you don't really you see him before you know about him.
Yeah, that's it. You're already coming across and you don't actually know who he is yet. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm trying to remember the version of events, like the timeline of when you come up to that point. Do you know who this person is? I suppose maybe during his first transformation, the first time you meet him at that point, maybe you don't know who he is yet. So that might be why. Yeah, maybe so. So some of the concept art for Birkin's transformation did make the jump from 1.5 to 2, and the art is recognisable to those that have fought Birkin in Resident Evil 2. So you can, some of the things that you see in concept art actually does make the jump, like in his transformations.
Right.
If you have a look at some of the concept art, but as we explained in our detailed description of the finished story, Birkin had been given a more fleshed out story, which not only explains his backstory and his exposure to the G virus, but it also goes on to explain more about the way Umbrella operate, looking to remove anyone, and they'll go to any lengths in their efforts to claim the various research and development by their employees. Now, although I won't go over Birkin's story too much, seeing as we covered this earlier, William Birkin was a top researcher with Umbrella and had developed a superior virus to the T virus, known as the G virus. Birkin had pretty much disconnected himself from his life as a father and a husband and had become obsessed with his creation. He knew Umbrella would ultimately come to claim the virus for themselves, and lo and behold, Umbrella dispatched a team of Umbrella Security Services agents to retrieve the sample and remove Birkin if necessary. Birkin's ultimately killed in the confrontation, and injecting the virus into himself, he hopes that it'll keep him alive. And through the game, Leon and Claire will come across Birkin at various stages of his mutation. In the initial confrontation, Birkin is mostly still human, except he's increased in size, and he's developed the mutated eye on his sort of shoulder and like at top half of his arm, and he's far stronger than he will have been, than he's ever been before. But the G virus continues to work, replacing and mutating damaged cells, and when Birkin appears again, he's transformed and he's mutated. His head sort of and face retract into his body, and a new cranium grows in its place, and he's got 2 new arms which come out of his torso. After sustaining more damage from another encounter with Leon or Claire, in the next encounter, Birkin will yet again transform as the G virus continues to mutate and develop tissue to replace the damaged cells. These 2 arms that Birkin just grew out have now turned into fully formed arms and limbs, and the whole body has become encased in an armour made from bone. Birkin has grown in size and he now absolutely towers over Claire and Leon, and at this point, any shred of Birkin as the person has just completely gone. When Leon or Claire encounter Birkin once again, a further transformation has occurred. Birkin bends over and his arms become legs. He's now become a 4-legged beast, and a large set of teeth have pushed through his chest, and he can leap around with great ease. Now, after this battle, Birkin has sustained so much damage, the G virus mutation is accelerated to a point where he loses any structure resembling any known creature, and he just becomes a huge mass of tissue with huge teeth, and tentacles grow from the mass. And in this final battle on the train with Leon or Claire, Birkin's final form continues to grow, and it's just devouring the train as it goes. And as mentioned, he's ultimately destroyed by the explosion and the fire caused by the self-destruct sequence.
He's like a mobile Sarlacc by the end.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. So, yeah, I guess he is really. Yeah, I just expect him to spit Boba Fett out. So with the main tyrant villain covered, we should probably move on to the other tyrant featured in the game, which is Mr. X.
Mr. X.
Yeah, X gonna give it to you. So, Mr. X was given to a variant of tyrant dispatched by Umbrella into Raccoon City to kill any living witnesses in the RPD station and then look for Sherry Birkin in order to retrieve the G virus sample. So Mr. X was one of 6 of this series of tyrants dropped into the city, and you can see this in the cutscene which introduced the creature. So the cutscene shows a helicopter carrying 6 canisters, and one is released, opening as it plummets to the ground and revealing the creature inside, and it just crashes through the roof of the RPD. So this huge pale-skinned man is dressed in like a long green leather coat, I don't know. But this creature will appear at certain points of the game to eliminate Leon or Claire, and he'll even smash through walls, and he can even climb up onto upper levels to attack. Mr. X only walks and attacks by punching and doing like a double axe handle smash onto the player. He generally stops his pursuit after you leave the area in which he appeared in. So later in the game, as mentioned earlier, Mr. X falls into a vat of molten lava or metal or whatever it is, and the coat he wears is destroyed. And after this, Mr. X goes under a transformation and mutates into more like a tyrant we've sort of become accustomed with in seeing in Resident Evil games. So the reason for this is that the coat actually has a purpose. The coat is known as a power limiter, and this has two purposes. It allows the tyrant to be controlled and receive orders, but it was also to stop the tyrant from mutating beyond a certain point where it could be controlled. So the power limiter would often be removed in situations where it would be better for the tyrant to lose control and mutate further in a situation where it had perhaps sustained a lot of damage. The ensuing transformation would obviously make the tyrant more deadly, and obviously the downside is that it couldn't be controlled anymore, but it was deemed in certain situations, allowing the tyrant to further mutate and transform to be a better alternative to the death or the destruction of the tyrant itself. Of the other versions dropped into Raccoon City, we'll discuss that in a future episode, but this version we'll tackle in Resident Evil 2. It really is the beginning of the invincible stalker enemy we see in a few entries of Resident Evil, and in many other sort of survival horror games which, you know, have tried to mimic this since this game's release. I mean, without Mr. X we wouldn't have had the Nemesis.
No.
And various other...
Yeah. Alien Isolation.
Yeah.
Very much.
You know, that's it. I mean, you just forget about Resident Evil, you know, all the other types of monsters that you come across in games outside of the Resident Evil franchise. These enemies which you just can't kill, you've just got to run.
Yeah.
You know, there's just loads
of or you can't kill until a very specific point in the story when you're allowed to kill
when they'll allow you to kill it. Yeah, exactly. So, of the other monsters and creatures we see in Resident Evil 2, there are, of course, the usual suspects, which are the staple of any Resident Evil game. We come across plenty of zombies, this time with a much larger variety of clothing, but also zombie ladies, which I need to find out if this is the case, but I thought that the zombie ladies in this sounded a lot like the voice actress for Jill in Resident Evil 3, but I need to find that out. So, the zombies this time were also incredibly well detailed, with worn clothing, visible wounds and blood. Zombies also had new and different movement patterns and animations. You could really tell that the production team had more experience on how to utilise the PlayStation's capabilities to their advantage and how to achieve some of the best looking character aesthetics we'll see on the console, I think. Instead of all just standing still until activated by the player, being in proximity of the enemy and then stretching their arms out and walking towards you. Sometimes they just sort of shuffle around, you know, and they'd even just be walking around sometimes, you know, and sometimes they'd drag a leg behind, and sometimes they'd be more aggressive and move quickly with their arms stretched out, you know. So there really was like this sort of variety of different zombies. So yeah, that was really, really cool that they sort of even created like different behaviours for them. You also see the return of dogs and crows and giant spiders, but we do have some new creatures in this one as well. So before I get to the most infamous new additions of the non-tyrant monsters, I'll firstly mention the plant creatures which we found in the lab area nest towards the end of the game. So these creatures, known as Ivy, are humanoid plant creatures which walk on vines for legs and ensnare the player with vine arms.
Yeah. They're sort of like big sort of leafy tendrils.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, I mean, if they come out of where your arms should be if you was a human. So, yeah, they are just a bit like that, aren't they? Just like these sort of like viney type things. And they spit acid. They can be easily killed with a flamethrower. They're kind of slow. But I think it's pretty cool seeing these enemies because it's likely that these enemies were derived from the Plant 42 creature that you see in Resident Evil 1. And I always sort of think that was probably, they were creating that and then they moved on to create these. That's kind of how I think it anyway. These would appear in 2 slightly different forms in the game, but we'll cover that a little later. But in this area, there's also a giant moth in one of the laboratories. It is fucking foul. In one of the laboratories, a moth which has escaped and mutated as a result of exposure to the T-virus, growing to an enormous size. However, its proportions are all incorrect. The wings aren't large enough to carry its body, and as such, it is unable to sustain flight. So instead, it just tends to have an initial burst of flight and towards the player, and then it just sort of scurries around the ground, and it's fucking disgusting. So it throws out like a poisonous dust, which damages the player, and it's extremely annoying. And although the moth is easy to kill, incendiary rounds from the grenade launcher or the flamethrower, or even a good enough blast from the shotgun will upset it and put it down. The room in which you find it is covered in like a mucus, which the moth has like secreted, presumably to build a nest, and it is just fucking disgusting.
Love a bit of moth mucus.
Yeah, moth mucus everywhere, please, pal. So you can even like see eggs in them, and it's like something out of Aliens. So, but also, you can even see like larvae on the keyboard of the computer that you need to use in that room, and killing those is really annoying because it seems like such a waste of ammunition. Yeah. It's like, I've got to fucking kill these things. I need to use this computer. What a waste. So I suppose the most famous new addition we need to mention of the enemies is, of course, the Licker.
Oh, yes.
So the Licker was a humanoid creature which walked on all fours. It exceptionally low to the ground. It could climb on walls and even stick to the ceiling, as well as leap high and cover a great distance. The Licker had sharp claws which had taken place of any hands or feet. The subject's brain is sort of enlarged, covering its eyes. It has all of its like muscle structures increased, and the skin's now just completely all gone, and its muscles are just all exposed. Due to the loss of its eyes, the Licker is extremely sensitive to sound and is attracted to the player being in close proximity to the enemy, or if the player is to run or interact with the environment, such as pushing objects, etc. So, I mean, I must admit, when I was younger and I used to play this game, I used to see him and I'd be like, "Look it!" But that was the worst possible thing you could do. Like, as I've played it in later years, I've learned that.
Yeah, it fights every sort of instinctual reaction you would have to seeing something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you after playing the previous games and then even what you've played up till that point, everything tells you that you just need to run everywhere.
Yeah.
Run to avoid the enemies.
Dodge as much as you can. Save your ammo.
Yeah. And then you see the Licker, which is absolutely terrifying. So your instinct, as you say, is to run. But that's the worst thing you can do, because that's what it's attracted to. So it doesn't tell you that either, though. Like, it doesn't tell you that at that point. So the first time you encounter one, it's like, shit, like it. But you really shouldn't be doing that. So, yeah, really, really cool, that, really. So the final feature, which gives the Licker its name and is very much its signature feature, is its long tongue, which can attack players at great distances. The tongue was razor sharp and had this annoying way of stopping you getting away from the Licker, as the sort of animation stuck you in place long enough for the Licker to close its distance to you. It's just so annoying. So these were a tough enemy, fast, and they took a decent amount of damage, and you needed a shotgun and upwards to stand a chance against these things. And when a 13-year-old me was playing this game, they gave me so much anxiety. They were also just incredibly scary looking, and they were very unique. They've become like a staple of the Resident Evil franchise now, and they've appeared numerous times throughout, and the design often changes ever so slightly, but the principle is still the same.
Yeah. I think they're the only... Correct me if I'm wrong. I think they're the only sort of staple Resident Evil monster, aside from zombies, that have shown up in every sort of adaptation of the franchise. They're in at least one of each of the movies. They're in the Netflix TV series. Yeah,
that's it, isn't it? They always find a way of being in everything. Like, even those like animated movies that they've done, they usually appear in them as well. And I think it's because the sheer design of them is just disgusting. It's a really.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the Xenomorph, to be fair.
Yeah. They were just instantly iconic, especially the way it's introduced in the game.
Yeah.
The sort of crawling across the window.
That's
first.
the first time you see
You
it.
just see the sort of
flash, and you're like, "What the fuck's that?" And then it comes on the ceiling, and it's just totally iconic, isn't it? So, their unique design, in fact, was the work of Ryoji Shimogama, and his name can actually be seen in the game as an Easter egg in the opening sequence of the game when on the first street of Raccoon City. If the player walks forward, there's a shop sign by the name of Amagomi's, which is, of course, Shimogama backwards. But I honestly don't know why they just didn't use Shimogama. Because it's not like anybody would have seen that name and been like, oh, that's the dude who made the fucking liquor design. It's like, what the fuck?
Come on, guys. You're taking me out of this now.
yeah. It's like, oh, you're going to do me dirty and put my name on backwards. Fucking hell. But but that's it. I mean, it's not like seeing that name would have really done that to you. It's not like, oh, how cheap you're going to put that guy's name in.
Yeah. Especially like Western gamers wouldn't have had a clue.
And I think also our understanding of game development back then in the late 90s isn't what it is now.
No.
We have so much more access to those in development and the people who are involved, and we are more invested in game design and production now, that if someone tells you that Shinji Mikami is working on a new game, you know who he is, and you know the name, and we know these names now. But you know, it's like turning around and go, oh well, we'll put a little Easter egg in for him. Oh yeah, no, but we can't put his name up though. Put it on backwards. Oh, good idea. What? Why? So I don't know, but anyway. I mean, it doesn't even sound like a name though, or a word, does it? I mean, what was it? Amagomi's? How is that any better than Shimogama? At least if it was Shimogama, you could say, well, it's a ramen place.
Yeah. Maybe there's like an extra layer of like in-joke that we don't know about because we don't speak Japanese.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe the backwards word is like a dirty joke or something.
Yeah, maybe so. It's just like, we'll put that in there because it's kind of funny and it's kind of rude. Yeah, maybe so. Who knows? So anyway, this creature's been haunting people's nightmares for years, and it probably will continue to do so because, as I say, it has just become a staple of the Resident Evil franchise ever since. So one of the other things to also change with the story would be the environments. So in the original 1.5 story, both Leon and Elsa would have started in the police station, and for that's for just one reason or another. But to better introduce the audience to the story, both characters now arrived in the city in the middle of the outbreak, and this helps the player relate to the character or characters, and they'd unravel the story of what was happening in Raccoon City along with the characters. So, and you'd sort of you'd be on that journey with the player would be on that journey with the characters, wouldn't they? Yeah. So this meant the players would have to navigate through some of the city streets and see firsthand the devastation that the outbreak has wrought on the city. The city exploration mostly had you go through little back alleys, which helped downscale the size of the environments, and this obviously helped with the building of each pre-rendered background and fixed camera angle scene. Larger open spaces were made more linear by using crashed cars and debris, police barricades, and even fire. And by the time you made it to the police station, this setting was drastically different to the building players had seen in some of the preview images during the development of what's now become known as 1.5. The police station was originally designed to be a lot more modern in its design, and it took inspiration from a lot of Japanese architecture of its time, with sort of bare concrete walls and columns and partitions in places we didn't see a lot of at this time in the West. It also was very right angled, and they just did
a bit brutalist.
Yeah, I guess in a way it kind of felt like it was quite sort of cold looking. Yeah. Very sort of almost clinical, I guess, in some ways. So the only problem with this is, for a game it just made the whole setting very boring. It was uninteresting. It was quite bland. Most areas were were lit very similarly and did little to help the rooms look unique in any way. The design of the police station was changed drastically, having a complete overhaul from scratch. Developers knew they needed to have a layout and a look which was very evocative of the Spencer Mansion from the game's predecessor. So the designers were instructed to take photographs of Western-style buildings in Japan and use those as inspiration for their environments, specifically the police station. One source said that some designers snuck into a mansion to take photos, but I haven't been able to fully clarify with any other source on whether that was true. But the programmers used photos to then create pre-rendered backgrounds using SGI-O2 computers, and the software was called O2, which were able to generate environments and pre-rendered backgrounds just from these photos.
Oh.
So they took a photo of it and then it created like this space, like a almost like a pre-rendered background, which would then like they had the walking areas on it. So you
added in the dimensions a little bit more.
Yeah. It sounds very very cool for its time, really. You just think that they made it, but yeah, they had this program that sort of did it for them in a way. But even still, even though they had this software, and it sounds oh wow, nice little hack, each background still took around 3 weeks to make. And when you think about how many angles you've got, that's a lot in it. So although some of the locations were inspired by 1.5, such as the parking lot, the jail cells, and the umbrella facility, not a single pre-rendered background or environment from 1.5 survived the transition to 2. So every single location and environment was conceived, planned, built, and programmed from when production restarted. That's a massive task. Bearing in mind, it sort of restarted in about, I think it was about August time.
Yeah, God.
That's massive. So the end result, however, helped create some extremely unique and beautiful backgrounds. And when coupled with the higher detail character models, they really work well together. And it solves that small issues from the previous game where character models really sort of contrasted against the backgrounds. This time around, they really came together in a much more cohesive way, and the character models really felt a part of the world rather than separate from it. So, they were rendered in such a way that the characters looked like they were walking in a world rather than these 3D models walking around on 2D spaces.
Yeah, there was a little bit less of that, the sort of the thing you used to get in like old cartoons where it's like you could tell what was like the beautifully painted background and then what was the bit of the wall that the brick was going to pop out of because it's like a completely different colour and
yes, exactly.
nowhere near
exactly
as much
what
texture.
I mean. Yeah, it's like like if a wall was going to collapse, you could see the actual different coloured bricks in the outlines of the section of the wall that was going to come out. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, so some people did criticise the finished appearance and layout of the police station, stating no police station looks like this and questioning all the statues, etc. But it was explained in an in-game lore that this building was repurposed into a police station, and we'd go on to learn that the building used to be a museum, which would of course explain why it's all grand and all the statues and the emblems and blah blah blah.
And the dungeon.
Yeah, and the dungeon, and the dungeon for the rapist. So in September of 1997, the game now began to enter final production, and preparations began for those final touches. Capcom were on track for their January 1998 release date, and very, very soon people would finally be able to get their hands on a taste of what was to come in the form of a demo. So, in September 1997, Capcom released Resident Evil Director's Cut, which we covered in our previous episodes covering Resident Evil. So, as we mentioned in these episodes, a demo disc of Resident Evil 2 was included with the Director's Cut, meant to serve as both an apology to players for the delay caused by the production stopping and restarting, but also serve as an appetizer and to show the players what the game would look like upon release. Unfortunately for some, the release of the demo only went on to confuse things, with some people expecting things they had seen in images and footage during Resident Evil's 1.5 production cycle. During this time, being as informed about production, etc., wasn't the same as it is now, where we get every little update as it occurs. So many people were unaware that production had stopped and restarted. Many players were expecting things to happen or appear in the main release of the game, and when it didn't, many of those people actually began to think two different games were in production. So, obviously this wasn't the case, but due to the stopping and restarting of production and the early images and the footage that were being released of the 1.5 build, this did create a lot of confusion for players. Nevertheless, 3 versions of the demo were released, and I've tried my best to get to the bottom of what, when, and how they were released. The first demo, which was Biohazard 2 Trial Edition, was released with the Japanese release of Resident Evil Director's Cut in Japan. So obviously that's Biohazard Director's Cut. This version of the demo played out from Leon's perspective. The path started where the released version of the game starts, and the player travels through Kendo's gun shop, through the usual streets, and of course allowed the player to reach the police station. And the demo ended when reaching the STAR's office. This version of the demo actually used some of the assets from 1.5 in order to get a playable demo out there in time for the release of Resident Evil Director's Cut. And while production was ongoing to get newer versions of these assets finished, etc. But these range from character models, images, items, and even some of the music. But this version also contained some game trailers on the disc, which players could watch. It also included a playable demo of Mega Man Legends and a trailer for Breath of Fire 3, found in a menu option named Information, which is why information? Like, why not like extra stuff or extra content? I don't know, but they called it Information. They were also exclusive to the Japanese version of the demo. So the US and the EU releases of this were virtually the same in relation to the playthrough of the game. Some of the 1.5 assets have now been replaced by the release versions found in Resident Evil 2, and otherwise it was exactly the same. You started in the same place, and you reached the STAR's offices where it ended. There was another version of another version of the demo which was put together, which was virtually identical to the release game itself. Now, this version had a 10-minute time limit and would continue to run even through that time limit would even continue to run through cutscenes, door transitions, and whilst you was even in your inventory screen. So it was a case of, if you want to get the most out of it, you've got to
peg it.
Really gun it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the version of the demo I remember.
Yeah,
it's on the OPSM disc mount.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the version I remember. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure it just came with like in the magazine.
Yeah, it was like the star demo of that month's official PlayStation magazine. Yeah, I remember playing it so many times and just sort of like testing myself, like how far can I get?
Exactly. Always just wanted to get into the bit where you remembered where every single thing was, just so that you could push it and push it and push it and get that a little bit further. So this only the players could only access those areas, the police station, the sub-levels of the police station were all sort of shut off. So you could actually only stay within the confines of the police station, really. But players did find a way to push just how far they could get with 10 minutes. And as we've just discussed, this version of the demo shipped with some gaming magazines, which were in print at the time, and I'm pretty sure this is where I played it. So as for the release date for Resident Evil 2, and as it approached, the game had a marketing budget of $5 million. That's just in marketing. So Capcom went all out for the marketing on this game, which included a live-action commercial for the game. Now, for the commercial, Capcom roped in legendary zombie horror movie director George A. Romero to produce and direct a live-action commercial for the game in the run-up to its January 1998 release date. The commercial was filmed at Lincoln Heights Prison in Los Angeles, which was decommissioned back in 1965, and the commercial starred American child star Brad Renfro as Leon Kennedy and Adrienne Frentz as Claire Redfield. If you've seen it, if you've not seen it, it's not hard to find. It's on YouTube. Go check it out. It's a cool little video. It's not very long. It's actually more interesting and more fun and better acted than any other live action Resident Evil film, which we was only discussing very, very recently. And Adrienne Frentz has continued to star in a few bits here and there, but I can't see anything she's been credited since 2021. But she has had 3 children, and she gave birth in 2015, again in 2020, and again in March 2022. So
that's
probably
fair
why.
enough.
Yeah, it's probably why she's not been in anything since 2021.
Fair reason to have a bit of a sabbatical, I think.
I would say so. And I reckon she's just probably taking a break. So, Brad Renfro's story isn't quite as straightforward, however. So, Renfro broke out in his debut acting role when he was just aged 11, and during his career starred in 21 films. He went on to win a number of accolades and was nominated for many, many more. And by the time he appeared in the Resident Evil 2 commercial, Renfro would have only been 15 at that point. So, but when you watch the commercial, I mean, I always think that Americans look older than they are. Anyway.
Oh, they do.
They do, don't they? I always think that. But when you watch the trailer, commercial, whatever you want to call it, yeah, he doesn't look 15. He looks older. You know, you don't.
I mean, Leon's not meant to be.
But that's it. Leon's meant to be young anyway, so it kind of fits.
Yeah, he's only meant to be early 20s at best.
Yeah, I think so.
In the game, so
yeah, so and he kind of looks that.
Yeah, you are right. Americans do look old fast, which is how they keep getting away with casting like 30-year-olds as 16-year-olds.
Yeah,
because they are interchangeable.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, so him being 15 at the time when he was in this commercial, it wasn't. Sadly, it wasn't long after this when things really started to become quite messy and quite sticky for Renfro. Unfortunately, he became involved with drugs, and in June 1998, Renfro was arrested for drug possession, carrying both cocaine and marijuana. So when he was 18, he'd already been admitted into drug rehabilitation. And in August of 2000, he was arrested for attempting to steal a yacht. I mean, ballsy.
Yeah, if you're going to do it, go big.
Yeah, exactly. Steal a yacht. Don't steal a car. Steal a yacht.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. They never mentioned not stealing a yacht in the beginning of those DVD adverts.
No.
You won't steal a car, you won't steal a handbag. Yachts are fine.
Yachts are still on the table. Help yourself to a yacht.
You're only stealing from the rich, it's fine.
Yeah, that's it. I think they can just go out and buy another.
Yeah,
so
if someone owns a yacht, they're not hurting for money.
No, they're doing all right. They're doing all right. Yeah, it's like actually, it turns out Brad Renfro was something of a modern day Robin Hood. So Renfro continued to have run-ins with the law for underage drinking, violating his probation, and driving under the influence, as well as driving with a suspended license. I presume that's cars, not yachts, though. So it'd
be great if he'd gone out of his way before the big heist to become an accredited yacht captain. It's like, look,
yeah.
I'm not above stealing a boat, but I am not piloting it without a license.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's just monstrous.
You can say what you like about me. I might steal yours, but I don't fucking drive them without a license.
I do my diligence.
What kind of monster do you think I am? So, he was he was arrested once again in 2005 in Skid Row during an undercover drug sweep where he was arrested for possession of heroin, to which he admitted. Sadly, Renfro never seemed to be able to stay out of trouble, and in 2007, he violated his probation by failing to enroll in a drug rehabilitation program. He was ordered to do so again, and if he failed to do so a further 2 times, he would be sentenced to either live in rehab or sentenced to jail. But unfortunately, Renfro was found dead in January 2008 as a result of accidental acute heroin morphine intoxication, and he was only 25 years old.
Damn shame.
It is, yeah, and I think, the topic of Brad Renfro is actually quite a complex one, and I think it sort of deserves more time spoken about it. And I think like this sort of like this brief overview don't really do it justice as to sort of how tragic his life was, and as often is the case with these people who are thrust into the limelight at a young age, he didn't have anything in place to protect him from what the world is like.
Yeah.
Because you're forced to grow up way too quick. You're exposed to things that you really shouldn't be exposed to. Yeah, and you know when he's appearing in trailers for a game like Resident Evil, and he's portraying someone much older, and he's wielding guns and stuff like that, you kind of just think to yourself, yeah, he was playing characters and roles way above his actual age, and good on him that he could pass for it, and he was a good enough actor to do so, and people sought him out. But unfortunately, it's the dark side of it, isn't it?
If you make a sort of a living of acting much older and much more mature than you are, the world treats you like that, and assumes that you can handle a lot more than you probably can.
Yeah, and something that which we'll probably will talk about in an episode where we talk about the many live action stars of Resident Evil.
Mm.
One of the things I was reading about with Brad Renfro is that girls were sending him who were much older than, we're talking young women.
Yeah.
Not just the girl fans, but young women who were much older than him were sending him fan mail, which was very explicit, and they were sending him pictures and stuff, and he was very, very young to be seeing. I mean, again, in 2000, and what was that date again? So let's have a look at that timeline again. So, yeah, in 1998, June 1998 was when he was first arrested for drug possession. Well, he'd only starred in that commercial for Resident Evil 2 6 months prior to that. 6-7 months prior to that. And we already know he was 15 at that point. So, he's getting those kind of letters, and he's been exposed to that kind of content.
Yeah.
That kind of material.
Yeah.
There's no wonder he's...
And anyone, even the most well-adjusted young person faced with a lifestyle like that would struggle to keep on the straight and narrow. Yeah, it's really tragic. I feel like I shouldn't have made so many jokes about him getting a yacht license now.
Yeah. I hope he did have his yacht license. I just hope he did. So I think it's something we'll talk about in a future episode, and we'll talk a little bit more about poor Brad Renfro. But it is tragic. It really is. But as for the commercial itself, it shows Leon inside what we are led to believe is the RPD station, watching on as zombies make their way into the station. He runs past sort of like jail cells with zombies locked inside, and he prepares to stand his ground when suddenly Claire appears. They stand together as they're surrounded by zombies, and the commercial ends. It's really cool, and it's a shame it was only ever shown in Japan. It was never shown anywhere else. And it was just sort of like one of these things that they put together, aired it in Japan, and the only way we'll ever see it is by watching it on YouTube. So, but yeah, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But Capcom had managed to reach a version of the game they were happy with, and more importantly, a version the new players would be happy with also. So in Japan, January 21st, 1998, Biohazard 2 was released on the Sony PlayStation. And in North America, they got their hands on it a week later on January 29th. As always, us here in the UK and the rest of Europe, we had to wait all the way until April 29th before we finally saw it. But it is here where we'll end this episode, and in the next episode, we'll pick back up discussing everything from the release, the gameplay, and the physical game itself will be in our hands to pour over. So I'll get my copy out and we'll go over it and we'll have a look at the book, because the book's always a good part of the physical copy. And we'll go over everything. So there we go. And what did you think to that, James?
That was a riveting and quite eye-opening conversation. Thank you very much, Bretterford. Yes, yeah, a lot of stuff there that I didn't know.
Yeah, you don't realise just how much there is to. I mean, the because of how much I know. Like I'm not. That's not a brag or anything, but because of how much I do know, I know where to go looking to get to put a lot of the stuff together. But it's when I'm doing that I actually learn a lot of this stuff myself. And like there's a lot of stuff in there which I didn't know. I probably knew more about the production of Resident Evil 1 than I did about 2. And I think as the titles have gone on, maybe 2 and 3 and probably Survivor, which is awful. I don't know an awful lot about the production, but I know a fair bit. But yeah, I came across quite a lot in there where I was like, that's messed up. Oh, that with Paul.
Yeah, I didn't know any of the stuff about Hideki Kamiya's like mental health troubles while they were making the game. There's something weird about like entertainment, be it maybe less so films, because I think actors are a little bit more visible, but when you see sort of delays or trouble in game development, I don't think many people's first assumption would be it's something wrong with the actual people making it. They assume it's a technical issue or
exactly
something, something's not gone down well in user testing, or or they've had like in this case as well, like just a complete ground up reshape of what the game is even going to be. But I don't think many people stop to consider that actually no, maybe making games is just really, really hard.
Yeah.
And the people making them probably suffer quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
In doing so.
I mean, we always hear of these like interferences from like corporate interference, and you hear, and I think there's always an element of that, because I think Mikami often felt like that with Resident Evil 2 as well, was that where he wanted to end Resident Evil as a franchise with Resident Evil 2. Not only did he butt heads with Kamiya or however you pronounce it, not only did he like butt heads with him, but he butted heads with Okamoto as well, because he was just like, look, you're getting involved with someone that you don't actually know anything about. I've been making games all the time. Just go fuck yourself and just pencil pusher or whatever. And I think you often do hear about that in games, because you hear about it in films as well, where the production companies want more and they start pushing for more. But yeah, I think you're right. I think usually when you hear of games being delayed, you're kind of thinking like, God, why don't you fucking set of squares? Just pull your fingers out. You're all computer nerds anyway. Just get the game made.
I saw the trailer for this at E3 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Why aren't I playing it?
Exactly, yeah.
It's like, because every single one of us has had a nervous breakdown.
yeah. Because all of us just can't sleep, and like we're just not actually ready for this. And I think Charlotte says that actually. Like she'll turn around and go, "How is it that I saw a trailer for this 5 years ago and the game still isn't released?" I mean, that is how like game production now has developed. It's like it's got to this point where it's taking years and years and years and years before we see a game. But yeah, again, I just don't think people realise.
No, it does seem hilarious in sort of retrospect, hearing all of that about this like fraught, troubled production, and it's like it was still out less than 2 years after the first game.
Yeah.
Now it's like if a game sequel comes out within, unless it's like a sort of conveyor belt game like a Call of Duty or something. Most like especially single player titles, if you get a mainline sequel within 5 years, you're laughing.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
That's it. And if you do get it, you're usually turning around, or the reviews will turn around and say, well, it's basically just a carbon copy of what came before.
It's been rushed.
Yeah, it's been rushed, and we've just got the exact same game that we've just had. And this is it, isn't it? It's just madness to think that they were there, and poor Hideki Kamiya, he's having this nervous breakdown because he feels like he's going to get blacklisted because he halted production of this game, and it got pushed from being released 12 months after it's released to just short of 2 years. It's just like, man, like such was the time. Again, like retrospect, it's crazy, isn't it? But yeah, I just think, God, that poor guy.
Yeah, but like you said, what a illustrious career in the industry he's had.
Yeah, and
Plus, that created some of the most beloved gaming franchises.
Yeah.
Of the last, ever really.
Well, I mean, Devil May Cry for a start. Look how that's endured. You know, it's got such a huge fan base now. You know, and you know he's responsible for that. And he's just awesome. And as we'll touch upon in many of the other episodes to come, how many of the things he had come up with, which will appear in future Resident Evil games, is just awesome.
Well, Devil May Cry will definitely appear very prominently at some point down the line.
It most certainly will. It most certainly will. Yeah, we'll definitely be moving on to that. I mean, there's some of that already in the workings when we're talking about Resident Evil 3. Actually, I'm doing my research for that. It's already surprising just how many of the things he had wanted to do for 2, which sort of started coming into effect in 3, and you've already seen some of the things he was already putting in place, which would then go on to be in blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's surprising. Really surprising. So, yeah, so there we go. So that is that. And, of course, in the next episode, we'll be picking up with everything that follows. And I think that is where we'll call it a day. So, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I hope you really enjoyed it. And hope you'll join us for the next one. Again, apologies for the delay in getting it out there, but hopefully we'll get back to something of a more regular schedule now, and we'll get these episodes out to you. And hope you've enjoyed yourself, James.
I've had a wonderful time. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. And I will say goodbye. James will say goodbye as well.
Goodbye.
And we will catch you in the next episode. Okay, thanks everybody. Take care. Bye.